Hi everyone, welcome to 1% Crime. I know you can't sleep, so I'll accompany you with crime stories that happened all over the world. Before we get to the story, tell me, where did you hear it from? And if you like this content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. The disappearance of 19-year-old student Katie Poor stands out as particularly unique. Her case was so baffling that even NASA experts participated in the effort to find her. Despite their best efforts, she could not be found alive. This shocking event deeply affected the nation, especially the normally peaceful town of Moose Lake, where Katie resided along with other students. Katie Elizabeth Puja was born on February 28, 1980, in the quaint town of Duluth in St. Louis County, Minnesota. She was the second child in a loving and ordinary family. She grew up with her older brother, and they shared a strong bond since childhood. When Katie started school, the family relocated to Carlton County and settled in Barnum. Katie was known for being sociable, active, and highly creative. She studied vocals, played guitar, and eventually began performing in a music band where she happily showcased her talents. Katie also had a deep love for animals. She volunteered at a shelter for stray cats and dogs and participated actively in cleaning and beautifying local parks. Her beauty was well recognized. In high school, she even participated in a city beauty contest where she achieved second place. After high school graduation, she attended college and moved to Moose Lake, a quiet and picturesque town in the same county as her family. By that time, Katie had been dating Mark for a couple of years. They both went to university and planned to get married. The couple rented a small but cozy apartment in a good neighborhood. Katie attended law school to study criminal law, while her fiancé focused on computer technology. They both worked part-time jobs to support themselves financially, save for their wedding, and avoid relying on their parents. Katie secured a job at a gas station near a busy highway where she took night shifts several times a week. She enjoyed this work because it allowed her to manage her schedule efficiently. However, her parents were concerned about her safety, since she was alone at the shop during nighttime along the highway connecting several large cities, a place bustling with traffic around the clock with various people visiting the gas station and store. Despite their concerns, Katie reassured them that there was no need for worry due to surveillance cameras everywhere and the presence of a nearby popular diner that remained crowded most of the time. On May 26, 1999, 19-year-old Katie Puya went to the store for her regular shift. It appeared to be an ordinary day. She switched with her colleague who had worked during the day and took up her position behind the cash register. Around midnight, a woman came by the gas station, filled her tank with gasoline, and walked into the store to pay and buy some snacks. After gathering her items, she approached the cash register but found it unattended. Confused, she waited for a while, then went to the utility room and called out. There was no answer. This felt strange since the store was fully operational, lights on, doors unlocked. When no clerk appeared after 10 minutes, she decided to contact the police. Police arrived promptly, examined the store and its surroundings, but found nothing unusual or alarming. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood traces. Everything was in place, including a good amount of money in the cash register. Robbery was ruled out immediately. Initially, it was assumed that Katie might have left voluntarily due to an urgent matter. However, all her personal belongings were still in the store, keys to her house and car included. Her vehicle was parked outside. This posed a question. How did Katie leave? On foot. Abandoning her car and purse seemed unlikely, pointing towards a more troubling scenario. The police reached out to Katie's parents to report her disappearance and inquire if they had any clues about her whereabouts or any reasons she might have abruptly left. Mr. and Mrs. Puya assured them that Katie was always responsible and would not abandon her duties as she highly valued her job. Katie's fiancé corroborated their statements, expressing his utter confusion regarding her sudden disappearance. At this point, Katie Puya was officially reported missing and the store treated as a potential crime scene. The investigation kicked off with a review of footage from 4 surveillance cameras installed in the store, each one positioned strategically to cover every angle inside. The initial hours of Katie's shift revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing suspicious occurred during those early hours. Around 11 p.m., a girl walked into the store. She chatted with Katie for about 10 minutes, but didn't purchase anything. From their conversation, it was clear that she was either an acquaintance or friend of the missing student. Approximately half an hour later, they entered the store. He looked around but quickly left. Shortly after, he came back in. At the moment, Katie had gone to the back room, and it seemed he might have been observing her from outside through the glass door. He re-entered the store and headed directly towards the back room. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in that section of the store, so what happened next is unclear. A few minutes later, Katie and this unknown man emerged from the back room together and moved toward the exit. The man was walking behind Katie, holding her by the hair with one hand and pressing his other hand against her back. It was evident that he was threatening her with a weapon, likely a knife or gun, and forcing her to leave with him. Essentially, this constituted an abduction from her workplace. This information was crucial. However, further investigation faced challenges because there were no cameras at the gas station adjacent to the store or in its parking lot. Consequently, determining where the suspect took Katie, his vehicle details, and his direction of travel was impossible. Given that the gas station and store were situated on an isolated stretch near a busy highway with no places to hide or go except along the road, it's likely someone would have seen if he had forcefully led her away on foot and contacted law enforcement. Therefore, it's presumed that he took her to the parking lot and placed her in his car. Another problem arose from the poor quality of the video footage from existing cameras. It was 1999 after all, and having any cameras at all back then was quite fortunate. The videos were grainy black and white images that rendered identifying features unclear, making it difficult to create a facial composite swiftly. Law enforcement and volunteers who joined the search scoured several miles around the gas station and store looking for possible clues, but found nothing conclusive. Investigators also interviewed Melinda, the sole witness, who spoke with Katie shortly before she vanished. Melinda confirmed she was a close friend and fellow student working part-time at a nearby diner. She mentioned seeing a suspicious man harassing both a customer inside the diner and another woman in the parking lot earlier on, suggesting to each woman that they should get better acquainted. Both declined his suggestions and walked away separately. Melinda's work shift ended at 11 p.m. As she locked the door and prepared to go home, a man showed up again. He approached, asking if the restaurant was closing and what time it would open in the morning. Melinda found his question odd and hurried to inform Katie about the visitor, suggesting they call the police. Katie, however, reassured her that everything was fine since the store had plenty of cameras. Melinda then remembered the man drove a black Ford F-150 pickup truck. They left the parking lot around the same time, but he overtook her quickly. She recalled part of his license plate, 5-57, and the letter Y. This was an important clue, but in the late 90s, without a national electronic database, locating the vehicle took time. Both Melinda and another witness at a gas station provided only rough descriptions of the suspect. Given it was dark outside, they couldn't get a clear look at him. They described him as a white male with long blonde hair, aged between 35 and 40. He spoke without an accent and wore a baseball cap that partially hid his face. The surveillance videos were not much help either due to low resolution. For the first time, police sought help from NASA specialists to enhance image quality and reveal more details of the suspect's face. Using advanced technology meant for astronomical purposes, they reconstructed a clearer image of him. The task was complicated, strange angles, as he never looked directly at any camera in the footage. Still, authorities were satisfied with the final composite portrait. This portrait was distributed to police stations statewide and frequently shown on news channels. Citizens were urged to stay vigilant and report any sightings of individuals matching this description or driving a similar vehicle. Soon after, police began receiving dozens of calls daily, though most turned out to be false leads. About a couple of days later, authorities detained a 25-year-old man who bore a strong resemblance to the individual of the composite portrait. Additionally, he had a prior criminal record for robbery and harassment. However, he was soon released due to a notable distinguishing feature, a large tattoo covering his entire arm, which the suspect in the video did not have. An important detail was that the man who escorted Katie out of the store wore a Yankee baseball team t-shirt with the number 23. According to Melinda, when the suspect approached her in the parking lot, he was dressed differently. Yet, upon reviewing the surveillance footage, she had no doubt it was him. A week later, a call came from Minneapolis. A worried man reported that the person in the portrait looked like his neighbor, who worked as a cleaner and drove a similar car. A couple of weeks ago, right around the time of the girl's abduction, this neighbor unexpectedly cut his long blonde hair and began growing a beard. This suspect turned out to be 50-year-old Donald Hutchinson. It was discovered that he had recently quit his job without any apparent reason, which raised suspicions. On the day of Katie's disappearance and the following day, he didn't go to work because he reported not feeling well. Former colleagues confirmed that he drove a black Ford F-150 with a license plate matching what police were looking for. Donald Aubin Hutchinson's real name is Donald Allen Blom. He was born in Minnesota in 1949 and grew up in a dysfunctional family where his father was an alcoholic who abused both him and his mother. As a teenager, Donald himself started drinking and displayed uncontrollable aggressive behavior that troubled everyone around him. Consequently, he was transferred to a special school for difficult children. At age 25, Blom was convicted and imprisoned after kidnapping and assaulting a 14-year-old girl. However, he served only 3 years before being released on parole. Shortly after, he was arrested again for assault and harassment, but received another short sentence. In 1983, Donald was arrested yet again. This time, he had kidnapped 2 teenage girls, taken them to a deserted area, and tied them to a tree. He assaulted one of the girls and strangled the other several times, then revived her, making it a game of life and death. Fortunately, a passerby walking with a dog heard their screams and saved them. Consequently, Blom served 9 years in prison. Upon his release, he changed his name, moved to another city, and avoided police attention for a long time. He got married after his release, and his wife bore him 4 children. On the surface, their family appeared happy. The man secured employment. However, his addiction to alcohol and substances turned him into a menace. His wife and children often suffered from his violence, but occasionally this monster sought other victims. Nobody was aware of Donald's criminal past. He went to great lengths to conceal it by changing his name and identity. He even altered his appearance by growing long hair and a beard that he sometimes shaved off. Initially, the police lacked solid grounds to detain him. They could only question him during their investigation. The suspect owned around 20 acres of land, just 12 miles from the store where Katie was kidnapped. In fact, right after Katie's disappearance, the police had already visited him upon learning about his black pickup truck. Donald claimed that he had sold the vehicle and that its license plate differed from the one they sought. He even provided a document as proof, which later turned out to be fake. Following these findings, the police secured a search warrant for his house and land property. They discovered an unexpected surprise in a large barn, where Donald attempted to hide his black Ford F-150 behind old junk and furniture. The license plate matched the one identified by Melinda. With this discovery, Donald's calm facade began to crack. Nonetheless, he continued denying any involvement in Katie's disappearance. Yet even with this significant lead, the pickup truck, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him at that point. The suspect's license plate was only a partial match, and there were neither witnesses nor video evidence confirming that Katie had been taken in that specific car. Consequently, the police shifted their focus to searching the house, aiming to find traces of the missing girl or even Katie herself. The interior was spotless. No blood traces, no signs of forcible confinement, and no clues linked to Katie's disappearance were found. However, inspecting the property posed challenges as it spanned over 24 acres and required more than a day's effort, along with significant resources. To address this, National Guard personnel and hundreds of volunteers joined in the search and investigation efforts. The first day yielded no results. By the end of the second day, however, police stumbled upon peculiar ashes, suggesting that something had been burned or cremated over an extended period. Among these ashes were bone fragments, which criminologists meticulously collected and sent to a laboratory for analysis. While most bones were animal remains, parts of a human skeleton were also discovered, including a tooth that warranted closer examination. Experts identified that the bones belonged to a young woman, aged between 18 and 23 years old. However, DNA testing faced complications because prolonged exposure to high temperatures had destroyed much of the material. When criminologists from other states joined the investigation, they managed to extract a DNA fragment matching the DNA of the missing girl. Unfortunately, this crucial evidence was deemed only indirect and could not conclusively establish the suspect's guilt. Hence, it became imperative to analyze the tooth found among the ashes to determine if it belonged to Katie. It was revealed that this tooth contained a rare filling made of silicone and zirconium, an innovative dental material. Conversations with Katie's dentist confirmed this unusual filling. He immediately recognized his work, since he had used materials obtained from an international dental conference on her just a week before she vanished. Though all collected evidence remained circumstantial collectively, a combination strong enough, it sufficed for law enforcement officials to arrest Donald and detain him until trial proceedings concluded. Thus unfolded developments leading up to his incarceration, pending further proceedings. On June 22, 1999, the man immediately pleaded not guilty, sought legal counsel, and expressed his willingness to cooperate with the investigation, prove his innocence. During a more thorough examination of his belongings, law enforcement discovered multiple firearms for which he lacked permits. Shortly thereafter, Donald began confessing. He admitted to kidnapping Katie from the store, bringing her to his property where he strangled her and subsequently burning her body. However, he denied any coercion related to intimacy with the victim, attributing his inability to do so to the significant amount of alcohol and illegal substances he had consumed. Donald further claimed that he used only firewood and paper to incinerate the remains, but experts asserted that this method alone wouldn't suffice without additional fuel. That evening was marked by aimless driving around the neighborhood. Upon noticing Melinda at a gas station, Donald initially intended to follow her when she left, but then changed his mind. He overtook her and proceeded home to change clothes before heading back to the store where Katie worked. This accounts for discrepancies in eyewitness testimony regarding what he was wearing. 2 weeks later, Donald unexpectedly recanted his confession, asserting his innocence once again. He alleged that he had been coerced into confessing due to threats made against him and his wife. His wife attempted to support this claim during the trial by offering an alibi, asserting that he was at home with her throughout that evening and did not leave the residence. In a striking turn of events during the trial, 2 former victims from 1983 came forward. They testified about their experiences with Donald, depicting him as a ruthless sadist who had subjected them to torture and exploitation. The evidence presented along with the witness statements led the jury to unanimously declare the defendant guilty, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of. Subsequently, Donald's wife admitted she lived in fear of her husband, habitually beat her and their children. She expressed that she felt compelled to provide him with an alibi out of fear for her own safety. After disclosing, she changed her last name, took their children, and moved to another state where they wouldn't be known. On a related note, detectives working on this high-profile case suspected that Blom could be a serial rapist and murderer. They linked him to several unsolved crimes involving the disappearance of young girls under similar circumstances. Specifically, he was suspected in the strangling of Wilma Johnson, found in 1983, as well as the 1993 abduction and murder of student Holly Spangler. In 2021, Blom was transferred to a medium-security prison at MCF Faribault. Conditions there were much more lenient, and he referred to it as a vacation. However, after complaints and protests from Katie's family, Blom was moved back to a high-security facility in Stillwater, Minnesota. He passed away there on January 10, 2023, at age 73. Katie Pierce's death has been covered extensively in popular television documentaries about real crimes. HLN Channel aired a series called Forensic Files, which featured an episode titled Tooth or Consequences, based on Katie's story. The Discovery Channel released an episode from their series New Detectives titled Fatal Abduction, dedicated to this particular case. Additionally, in 2010, a documentary titled From the Ashes was produced using materials from the investigation. On March 20, 2020, in the city of Alua, Portugal, 20-year-old Diogo Goncalves went to meet a girl he admired greatly. Unfortunately, he had no foresight on how this seemingly romantic evening would culminate. The picturesque resort town of Albura, noted as one of the premier destinations in the Algarve region of southern Portugal, was Dee's birthplace in 1999. As an only child in a modest yet industrious family whose livelihood hinged primarily on the fluctuations of tourism, Diogo was regarded by his parents as an exemplary son. Acquaintances described him as decent, responsible, hardworking, and reliable. Additionally, he was an outgoing young man who cherished the company of friends and family. Diogo pursued his high school education in his hometown and subsequently embarked on a computer science degree. To support his academic aspirations and contribute to household expenses, he began working at McDonald's at the age of 16 in 2015. By the time he was 17 and still employed with the renowned company, Diogo's life took an unforeseen and tragic turn. One day, his father suffered a stroke, which led to him being in a vegetative state. The media reported extensively on this event. Compounding their troubles that same year, as Diogo and his mother were grappling with this new challenge, another misfortune struck him hard. His mother, his unwavering supporter, was struck by a vehicle on her way to work at the mall where she was employed as a cleaner. She was dragged several meters by the car and fell into a ditch. Sadly, she succumbed to her severe injuries. Even though the driver fled the scene initially, law enforcement officials were able to identify and bring him to justice. While awaiting legal proceedings against those responsible for both his parents' dire situations, it became necessary for Diogo's father to be placed in a specialized medical facility for appropriate care. His maternal aunt, concerned about his precarious circumstances, invited him to stay with her. However, due to irreconcilable differences that emerged after weeks together, cohabitation proved unfeasible. Subsequently, confiding in a friend about these challenges led to an offer from his friend's parents. They provided him accommodation within their residence located in Alouette's Algarve neighborhood. This proximity alleviated some distress for Diogo, as living amongst familiar faces brought some semblance of comfort during such trying times. Despite being quite young, Diogo showcased remarkable skill in handling challenging situations through patience and optimism. At 18, he completed his degree in computer technology in 2017 and secured a 6-month internship at Vila Vida Park, a renowned 5-star tourist hotel. His performance there was noteworthy, leading the executives to offer him a technician role. In 2018, Diogo decided to accept this position, resigning from his job at a fast food restaurant chain, where he had worked for nearly a year and attained the role of duty manager. He embarked on a new chapter of his life, anticipating numerous opportunities that would aid his progress after the difficulties he had faced. As Diogo began to settle into his new job and look towards a brighter future, he decided to purchase a car. He formed good relationships with colleagues, including Maria Malva, a 19-year-old security guard at the hotel, who particularly caught his attention. Like Diogo, Maria also came from humble beginnings and had encountered significant challenges. Her mother struggled with mental health issues. While her father abandoned the family early on, she never reconnected with him. Maria was passionate about martial arts and practiced karate. While she aspired to become a police officer, her application was rejected due to her tattoo. This setback led her to enroll in training at a security company specializing in various private security sectors. Diogo openly expressed his admiration for Maria from the start, but she did not reciprocate his feelings and was rather aloof towards him. Fabio Acosta, a close friend of Diogo's, mentioned that Diogo was infatuated with Maria. According to Fabio, Diogo's dedication to her was intense enough that he declined an attractive job offer from the Sheraton hotel chain in Lisbon, because he did not wish to be separated from her. Additionally, when Maria was working her shift, Diogo often brought meals for her. As time went on, they became almost inseparable observers, frequently assumed they were a couple despite there being no romantic relationship between them. Maria confided in Diogo that she wanted no romantic involvement as she had recently ended a toxic relationship with a naval officer, but simultaneously gave him mixed signals. Despite this ambiguity, Diogo never abandoned hope for a future with her and continuously sought ways to be near her and show his affection through various gestures aimed at pleasing her. One day, Diogo was deeply disappointed when he stumbled upon a video on social media showing Maria kissing another girl on the lips. He felt upset because he believed she should have informed him that she did not like men and that this was why they would never be together. Fabio, Diogo's best friend, attempted to calm him by explaining that girls sometimes do this, but Diogo remained unconvinced. He insisted that she had misled him and that this was why she had rejected his romantic advances. Despite this disappointment, Diogo and Maria stayed friends. She continued to accept his gifts and invitations for dates. Many times, Diogo offered to walk her home, but she always mentioned that her roommate had a jealous boyfriend and did not want another man entering her apartment. Time went by, and in December 2019, Diogo learned he would finally receive compensation for his mother's death, which happened 3 years prior. After receiving the amount of 70,000 euros, he decided it was time to purchase a house, so he wouldn't need to keep paying rent. Diogo then shared this exciting news with his friend Maria. Shortly thereafter, Maria resigned from her job at the hotel. She said she could no longer tolerate her co-workers' comments about the supposed relationship between her and Diogo. Additionally, she explained that she wanted more time with her mother, who required significant attention due to a mental illness. Initially, there was no reason to doubt her explanations. However, subsequent events hinted that her decision to quit might have been driven by more sinister motives. This is where Mariana Fona comes into play, a 20-year-old nurse at the hospital who had a stable relationship with Maria. The two young women lived together in Mariana's parents' home, since they were not financially secure enough to live independently and enjoy their relationship fully. Maria found herself in this situation when she learned about the significant sum of money Diogo would receive. Interestingly, from that point onward, Maria started drawing closer to Diogo. It appears likely that Maria shared this information with Mariana together. They plotted to deceive him and gain access to his bank account details with the intention of stealing his compensation money. One day, after Diogo had repeatedly refused, Maria informed the young man that she wished to spend a romantic evening with him. This proposal was a surprising gift for the 20-year-old, who found it hard to believe his ears. After waiting for so long, the idea of being close to the girl he loved made him ecstatic. Their rendezvous was scheduled for Friday evening, March 20th, 2020. Diogo was elated and had no doubts about what might have led Maria to change her mind so abruptly. Although Maria and Mariana shared different accounts of what transpired that day, the following details are based on media reports and official information. Upon Diogo's arrival, Mariana offered him orange juice that she had brought herself. Unbeknownst to him, the drink contained a hidden ingredient, 3 ampoules of DM, a central nervous system drug with anesthetic and sedative effects. Mariana reportedly proposed using this substance, which she had stolen from the hospital where she worked. The girl's plan entailed sedating Diogo to access his banking information and manipulate his fingers to unlock his phone. Mariana allegedly waited in a car outside while her friend executed their plan. She sent multiple texts to Maria checking if the drug had taken effect, since it was acting slower than anticipated. Inside, tensions rose as Diogo grew increasingly unnerved without understanding what was happening. Attempting to calm him, Maria promised an erotic dance, but insisted on tying him to a table first. After several minutes in this restrained position, Diogo panicked and pleaded with Maria to release him. Her demeanor turned aggressive as they began to struggle. Using her martial arts skills, she overpowered Diogo, bringing him down and restraining his neck with her arms, yet cutting off his air supply. According to Mariana's account, Maria eventually summoned her into the apartment. Mariana found Diogo on the floor and questioned Maria about deviating from their original plan, merely stealing his keys and taking his money. Upon discovering that Diogo was unresponsive, the nurse administered resuscitative measures. Upon awakening in a highly agitated state, he attempted to attack Mariana. Perhaps recognizing another conspirator against him, he tried defending himself. Reacting to Diogo's aggressive response towards her friend, Maria intervened by grabbing him from behind once more, bringing him down and constricting his neck again. In light of these events, both women's actions have been scrutinized as part ongoing investigations rooted in available evidence and testimonies provided by those involved. Diogo's life tragically ended at the hands of the girl he loved. His body lay in the living room of Maria and Mariana's house, where they immediately set about their planned robbery. They first cut off his thumb and index finger to unlock his phone, access a mobile payment app, and transfer money. This process took several days due to a daily transaction limit. The crime occurred just as 9 out of 19 restrictions began, with remote working becoming commonplace. Diogo was supposed to go to work the next day. The girls attempted to prevent his coworkers from noticing his absence and raising concerns. They sent a message from Diogo's phone to an IT colleague, stating Diogo could not go to work and needed a replacement. This message raised suspicion because Diogo wasn't known for making such requests at short notice. When asked if everything was all right, Diogo's phone responded affirmatively. Conversations between this hotel employee and others continued through Friday into part of Saturday, but the messages increasingly seemed uncharacteristic of Diogo. One of these messages reached Diogo's supervisor, stating Diogo wouldn't return to work as he had met a woman from France and would be moving in with her. This struck the boss as odd, since Diogo was known for his reliability and wouldn't abruptly leave his job. Seeking clarification, the supervisor tried calling Diogo but received no answer. Another message claimed Diogo wasn't in a condition for phone calls. The supervisor responded that hearing directly from Diogo would be reassuring. The reactions from Diogo's loved ones to these impersonated messages led Maria and Mariana to adjust their strategy regarding his disappearance. They decided to fabricate a scenario suggesting that Diogo had taken his own life and then plotted to dismember his remains for disposal. Maria later confessed their plan was inspired by the TV series Dexter, which depicts a forensic expert who eliminates criminals while erasing traces of his crimes by dismembering victims. These actions highlight how communication breakdowns and erratic behaviors can raise suspicions and lead authorities closer to uncovering criminal deeds, even when efforts are made to mislead those searching for answers. After executing their reprehensible plan, they placed Diogo's body in trash bags, storing them in the trunk of their vehicle. They then proceeded to an ATM and a shopping mall. Security cameras captured them hugging and laughing. Upon returning to their residence, they began the gruesome task of dismembering body. Diogo's torso was eventually placed in a black bag, with the remaining parts disposed of in a container. During these events at Mariana's parental home, Diogo's friends initiated a campaign to report him missing and contacted the authorities. The authorities waited the mandatory 48 hours before officially declaring him missing. Subsequently, the girls departed from the house. Maria drove Diogo's car towards the cliff near Cabo de San Vicente Lighthouse, with Mariana following in her own car. At approximately 2 p.m., Mariana discarded Diogo's torso off the cliff, abandoning his car nearby to create an impression that Diogo had ended his own life. Unfortunately for them, Maria did not anticipate that instead of falling into the sea, the remains would become lodged on a rock. The girls then departed together in Mariana's car. They drove approximately 7 kilometers to the Pago do Inferno waterfall in Tavira, where they disposed of what remained of Diogo into the water. Shortly after this incident, Diogo's vehicle was discovered in a parking lot near Cabo de San Vicente Lighthouse. Reports indicated that 2 laptops were found within the car. Forensic police arrived promptly and conducted thorough land and sea searches. This led to the discovery of a young man's torso, partially enveloped by a black garbage bag near one location along the coast. Simultaneously, at another coastal site, Pago do Inferno, a French couple made a horrifying discovery: Diogo's head. After extensive efforts from law enforcement officers, his hands and feet were also recovered. The investigators handling this case found several aspects puzzling, considering that Diogo appeared to be an unassuming individual who avoided unsavory company based on collected data about him. Further probing by authorities revealed that Diogo had received significant compensation following his mother's death. They uncovered substantial transfers from Diogo's account to Maria's account through monetary transactions, tracking methodically carried out by investigators. The detectives' next step was to locate Maria and clarify why Diogo's funds ended up with her. The girl then attempted to persuade the police that she had killed the young man because he was attempting to abuse her. She asserted this as the reason she left the hotel before the incident. However, an examination of the text messages between the victim and Maria revealed that this was not true. She and Diogo had grown closer after Maria stopped working. During her first interaction with the officers, Maria claimed sole responsibility for planning and executing the actions leading to the fatal shooting. She emphasized that Mariana had no involvement in the crime. However, Mariana's account contradicted Maria's claims. The nurse stated that Maria confided in her a plan to steal Diogo's money, but intended to take his life as well. She wanted him to suffer enough to disclose his bank account password. The collected evidence proved sufficient for convicting both girls. Investigators had phone records, the deceased's cell phone, and ATM surveillance footage at their disposal. Maria and Mariana were arrested on April 1, 2020, and appeared in court in June of that year. The judge meticulously followed Maria's recounting of events, where she insisted on pleading guilty and denied any involvement of Mariana. According to her version, Diogo's body remained for 2 days in a car parked in a garage, and it was there that his remains were dismembered when Mariana's family slept. After hearing Mariana's detailed account of events, the judge repeatedly asked about her whereabouts during the dismemberment executed with surgical precision at the joints. The courtroom's attention turned towards Mariana. She anticipated these questions and stated that since everyone knew she worked at a hospital, they assumed she dismembered the corpse herself. To clarify matters further, she suggested using internet resources for verification. Given the seriousness of this cold, calculated, reckless, and brutal crime, both individuals received custodial sentences as determined by the judge. A few months later, On February 24, 2021, the trial began. During her testimony on February 26, 2021, Maria confirmed that she initially wanted revenge on Diogo for the alleged attempted violence, but stated she did not intend to take his life. The defendant admitted her intent was to humiliate the victim and verified that her friend had no relationship with the young man and was unaware of the alleged attempted violence. Maria also asserted that her actions were not motivated by compensation. The girls appeared in court together, however, they did not look at each other throughout the trial. Rumor suggests that after their arrest and subsequent jail time, they decided to end their relationship. The trial included testimony from several witnesses, including forensic expert Teresa Costa. The expert explained that the amount of dipum found in Diogo's blood was significantly less than expected from 3 ampoules, suggesting either Diogo had not taken the prescribed dose or had ingested it many hours before his death. On April 27, 2021, the court issued its decision. Maria was found guilty of aggravated murder, accessory to desecration of a body, robbery, unlawful access, and fraud. Additionally, she was convicted of carjacking and possession of an illegal weapon. She received a sentence of 25 years in prison and was ordered to pay Diogo's father €265,000 in compensation. Mariana was acquitted of murder but found guilty of desecrating a corpse and complicity in fraud. For this, she received a sentence of 4 years in prison. She was released because none of the offenses involved pre-trial detention until final sentencing. The court concluded that Mariana's attempt to revive Diogo demonstrated she did not intend to kill him. In reaching this decision, the judge took into account Mariana's confession, where she expressed full responsibility for her actions. However, this verdict was not well received by the Portuguese public, who viewed Mariana as equally culpable in the heinous crime against Diogo as Maria. Following the verdict, Mariana exited through the back door where her father, present at all hearings, awaited her. Both refrained from making any statements to reporters. On September 29, 2006, in St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow, United Kingdom, detectives discovered the body of a young woman. Little did they know, this crime was just the tip of the iceberg. Their investigation led them to one of the ruthless serial offenders in the country. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 children in the family of Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. Early on, Peter exhibited a difficult character, prompting his parents to send him to a boarding school in 1953 when he was just 7 years old. However, this seemingly did not yield much benefit. Later on, he was sent to a correctional institution. After completing this period, Peter moved to Brighton, England. There he started a relationship with Margaret Mount, a 17-year-old typist who found his personality irresistible. In August 1969, they got married. However, Peter soon revealed his cruel and controlling nature. Besides that, he was involved in criminal activities and was convicted and imprisoned for theft and forgery a year later. This led Margaret to divorce him in 1973. In the same year, Peter married Sylvia Jeffrey, a local nurse who also fell for his charm. That year they had their first son and named him Ian. Tragically, their daughter Clara died shortly after birth in 1974. Grieving over their lost child and suffering from Peter's abusive treatment led Sylvia to leave in 1976 with their young son. Decades later, when Peter was in his 40s, he pursued new romance again, this time with Kathy Wilson, who was only 16 years old at that time. Vulnerable and impressionable, which made it easy for him. Together, they had a son named Daniel, the couple's only child. They married in 1989 and moved to Scotland. It proved challenging. Kathy couldn't go outside freely due to her husband's control over every aspect of her life. His violent behavior continued, reaching significant levels. Consequently, isolation exacerbated her living conditions. The young woman mustered the courage and chose to flee with her son in the late 1990s. It's uncertain if Kathy's departure triggered the worst aspects of the man's character to emerge. However, from this moment on, Peter unleashed a terrible side of himself upon the world, ready to cause much harm. Unfortunately, his path intersected with that of a lovely girl named Vicky Hamilton. Vicky was born in Scotland in 1976. She was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton, a married couple who had previously welcomed their firstborn daughter Sharon. Later, Lee and Lindsay joined the family. Nevertheless, serious disagreements between the spouses led to divorce being the most appropriate decision. Vicky, Lee and Lindsay stayed under their mother's care and moved to South London. The eldest daughter, Sharon, remained in Bathgate, BTHG, but this distance didn't hinder Vicky and Sharon from maintaining their close relationship. When Vicky turned 15, Sharon saw it as a good opportunity for her sister to take a step towards independence, a desire many teenagers have. After traveling alone by bus to Scotland for a weekend visit, Vicky was supposed to return home to her mother's house. It marked her first solo trip by bus. Sharon viewed it as a small yet significant adventure. On Saturday, February 9, 1991, the sisters went shopping and engaged in continuous conversation. Sunday was typical, except that Vicky felt apprehensive about her return trip. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. Vicky ensured she had enough money for the fare and reviewed the bus route one last time with her sister before they hugged each other tightly. Standing at the bus stop, snacking on a bag of chips across from the police station, it was there Vicky's path crossed with Peter's fatefully. He forcibly dragged her into his car and committed unspeakable acts, raping her and then taking her life either out of malice or to prevent her from reporting him. Peter retained possession of the girl's purse. When Vicky did not arrive at her mother's house and there was no communication from her, her family began searching for her frantically in desperation. Simultaneously, they alerted the authorities about her absence. Once the police began investigating the disappearance, V's face became one of the most recognizable in Scotland. The search operation grew into one of the largest in the country's history. Amidst this uproar, Peter opted to relocate to southeast England, specifically to Margate, where he settled into a charming house with a garden. There, Peter brought Vicky's lifeless body. He wrapped her remains in plastic and concealed them beneath a layer of concrete. He then covered everything with soil. Neighbors thought he had dug a sandbox for his young son, who was 3 years old at the time. Peter's name never surfaced during the initial investigation into Vicky's disappearance. The police found no leads on Vicky's whereabouts and considered her a likely runaway, viewing her as an unhappy teenager due to her parents' divorce. Their theory of voluntary disappearance was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicky's purse was discovered near the main bus station in Edinburgh. Peter, always one step ahead of authorities, created this false lead and completely diverted the course of the investigation. Detectives spent 2 fruitless months searching in London. It is known that Vicky's mother died soon after. Over the next decade, Vicky's family and town residents continued to follow the case closely, but despite listing more than 7,000 names in the file, taking nearly 4,000 statements and presenting about 500 documents along with 380 potential pieces of physical evidence, all efforts led to a dead end. The case was eventually shelved. The next young woman who encountered Peter was Dina McNichol from Essex. She had a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician, and her mother had tragically died many years prior in a car accident. By age 18, Dina was known as good-hearted and cheerful, a wonderful friend. She had just completed high school and held great hopes for her future. On one hand, possibly, she aimed to take a gap year for travel. On the other hand, she aspired to attend university. However, nothing was certain, because although Dina had applied to several institutions of higher education, she hadn't yet received any responses. During the first weekend of August 1991, Dina attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a young man named David Tremlett. Between dances, they discovered they liked each other. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The following day, Dina assisted him in dismantling the tent, and they agreed to hitchhike back home separately. However, since part of their route was the same, they decided to hitchhike together. Tired but happy, the young couple hit the road to catch a ride. That's when Peter appeared and offered them a lift. David got out of the car first, and Dina wrote down his phone number before saying goodbye. Alone with the unknown driver, Dina was about to experience a real nightmare. On that same Monday, August 5th, 1991, Peter repeated his previous crime as with Vicky. He used Dina's scarf as a gag. After committing the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dina's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When her relatives noticed someone withdrawing money from her account, they immediately suspected something was wrong. Her family knew how carefully she saved every penny and what she planned to use that money for, either traveling or continuing her education. Days and weeks went by with no word from Dina. The worst part for her family was living in uncertainty. Though unspoken aloud, everyone was sure something terrible had happened. After all, if Dina were alive, she would have returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or explaining anything. Later in 1993, he settled in Hampshire, specifically in a rented apartment in Leek Park. He argued that he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4, 1993, two 14-year-olds went to visit a local woman but found she wasn't home. They decided to ask other neighbors if they had seen her around instead. As a result, they knocked on Peter's door. The man saw a unique opportunity and invited them into his home to wait for the force they were looking for. They saw that the man's 5-year-old son was in there, mistook him for a friendly person, and agreed to enter. There is another version about the reasons for this meeting, which suggests it was not accidental. The two girls came to Peter's home in response to a request for a babysitter that the man had made. They trusted him because when they arrived, they saw his son and stayed to look after him. Everyone agrees that when the child fell asleep, Peter tied them up, threatened them with a knife, and forced them to drink alcohol. He then beat and raped them, injuring one of the girls. Just when they thought their lives would end at the hands of this extremely cruel man, a boy woke up. This saved them from suffering the same fatal fate that befell Vicky and Dina. In an effort to keep his son from realizing what had happened and understanding what kind of father he was, Peter decided to leave the apartment with the child. According to some reports, Peter left around 2 a.m., but before that he turned on the gas in the kitchen, hoping to complete his monstrous task. However, the girls regained consciousness and managed to escape. They went to the police and reported all the abuses committed by Peter, whom they described in detail. Peter returned his child to his mother and joined a religious sect called the Communion of Jesus under a false name. He hoped to go unnoticed there, but in the meantime, media published his photograph provided by police, making his face widely known. Due to mass media coverage, information about this man started pouring in, and his car was also identified thanks to BBC Crime Watch program. He was located, and after 40 days on the run, he was captured in Brighton. He appeared in court on May 18, 1994, where he pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent acts against two young girls, and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter did not serve his full sentence, and was released in 2014 at the age of 58, immediately after his release from prison. He went back to Scotland, aiming to relocate from the area where he was registered as a sex offender. For a while, he managed to stay off the radar until 6. Under a false name and posing as a homeless person, he knocked on the door of the Church of St. Patrick in Glasgow. To avoid getting exposed, he adopted the name Peter McLaughlin. Dennis and Katie Curran, a married couple from the church's charitable group, recall that evening vividly when a homeless man sought shelter. Despite his vulnerable appearance, Katie had an uneasy feeling about him. Peter was brought up as a Catholic and soon felt at ease in this church. His apparent begging served as an effective disguise because it only aroused sympathy from parishioners, with few paying much attention to him. Consequently, he roamed freely around the church, an ideal hiding place for him. However, his predatory instincts stayed intact. Being in a sacred place held no significance for him. Calculating every move meticulously, Peter displayed eagerness to assist in church repairs. After about 6 or 7 weeks, he asked the priest if he could join the maintenance staff. At that time, people facing financial difficulties often sought refuge in churches. It was through such circumstances that Angelica Clark crossed paths with Peter. Angelica was a 23-year-old woman from Poland who came to Scotland during the summer of 2006. She wanted to spend her summer break working to earn money and fund her language studies back home. She lived at the parish house of St. Patrick's Church, where she also worked as a cleaner. Peter took an immediate liking to her and somehow convinced her to help him with various tasks occasionally. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelica spent several hours assisting him in painting a shed. Some parishioners noticed them together before Peter attacked her at the back of the chapel. Leica Brown, 47, and her husband Andrew, 46, who lived in a multi-story house overlooking the church, heard a woman scream through their open windows. In her statement afterward, Leica described it as a brief scream that sounded like someone being forcibly restrained. It was so eerie that it compelled her to get up from the couch and approach the window, but she saw nothing. The scream heard by the Browns coincided with the moment when Peter caught the young girl off guard as she stood her back to him. He struck her forcefully and dragged her to the back of the chapel, where he continued to beat her. After she lost consciousness, he raped her and then inflicted several knife wounds. He hid the body in the basement under the floor near the confessional. At this point, Angelica was still alive. Several hours passed, and parishioners began to notice that the young girl was missing. That's when Dennis informed his wife, Katie, about Angelica's unusual disappearance. The police quickly initiated an investigation and started interviewing members of the community one by one. During these interviews, it came to light that Peter was the last person seen with Angelica, albeit disguised as Pete, a homeless laborer. Eventually, he became the prime suspect. Officers went to question him, but found no evidence linking him directly to Angelica's disappearance, so they continued their investigation. Aware that it was only a matter of time before they discovered the body and traced everything back to him, Peter fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation. He soon began to suspect that this case wasn't merely a disappearance. Based on their findings and collected testimonies, Detective Swindle believed it was unlikely Angelica would be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered her body in the chapel. This news shocked British society, due to both the nature of the crime and the location chosen by the perpetrator for hiding the body. Examining the girl's injuries led Detective David to suspect that this wasn't Peter's first crime. However, he didn't yet know how horrific and dangerous this individual turned out to be. Further revelations were inevitable. DNA found at the crime scene and on Angelica matched data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they learned exactly who they were dealing with, a man whose actions indicated deep-seated brutality and criminal sophistication. The individual they were looking for turned out to be Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints had been discovered at the crime scene. Consequently, the first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was distributed nationwide, and the Scottish police reached out to the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search across the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, in London, Peter attempted to conceal himself by going to a hospital and pretending he had heart problems. He claimed he had chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. Identifying himself as a plumber named James Kelly, he was examined by Dr. Nick Lasso. However, something about his demeanor and behavior raised concerns for the doctor. Initially avoiding eye contact, a behavior atypical of most patients, Peter became suspicious when tests failed to reveal any clear physical cause for his alleged pain. The doctor's suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph that had been circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and doctor contacted the police. This phone call significantly altered the course of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken into a room so Alan could speak with him. Immediately following this encounter, Peter was arrested. Although initially only charged with violating the sex offender registry, this approach allowed officers time to build a criminal case against him. Under Detective David's leadership, evidence gathered led to Peter's trial for crimes against Angelica in late March 2007. Despite substantial evidence against him, Peter denied committing violent acts against her, claiming instead they engaged in consensual sexual activity. He also denied providing false information to police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings characterized by lies and manipulations on Peter's part, the truth finally prevailed. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, but with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team were convinced that there was more to Peter's story. While the trial was ongoing, detectives delved into Peter's life. They gathered additional evidence and compiled a dossier. This was done with the involvement of various law enforcement agencies across the country. To avoid harming or interfering with Angelica's case, they preferred to conduct their work confidentially. The joint police operation was known as Anagram. Part of their work involved connecting missing persons cases to places where Peter had been. During these investigations, they established 2 precise links, one in Bathgate and another in Margate. Several weeks later, a search was conducted in Peter's old house on the coast. They found a knife with DNA samples hidden in the attic. However, there was nothing else there. Then they went to the house where Peter lived in Margate. There it became clear they were dealing with a serious criminal offender. Investigators dug up a sandbox in the garden of the house, one that Peter had made for his son. And shockingly enough, they found a female body there. But that wasn't all. When they continued searching at the same location, they found another body. A woman's handbag was also discovered at the scene, which the team preserved for DNA analysis. Forensic experts worked diligently to establish the identities of the two victims, determine their ages, and estimate their dates of death. They also analyzed traces from the handbag. These genetic traces were very strong, but initially yielded no matches in the National DNA Database. However, on June 1, 2007, there was a crucial breakthrough. The DNA matched Peter's fingerprint. This development proved monumental for investigators who deemed it necessary to move forward decisively in this direction by November. On August 14, 2007, authorities confirmed that one of the bodies found belonged to Vicky Hamilton, who disappeared at 15 years old during her first independent. Her family had been waiting for answers for 16 years. Later, it was announced that the second body belonged to 18-year-old Dinah McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Royal Prosecution Service contacted Peter's lawyers and charged him with the murder of Vicky, leading to his trial. Officers had to restrain Vicky's father, Michael, after he saw Peter face to face. Michael later admitted he simply wanted Peter to know he was there to defend his daughter's name and protect her memory. After a month-long trial on December 2, 2008, Peter was found guilty of Vicky's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial for Dinah took place in December 2009. On December 16, after the defense failed to provide evidence exonerating their client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dinah's murder. He subsequently received his third life sentence. On November 22, 2007, it was reported that Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates. He sustained minor injuries. Shortly before this incident, the serial killer had confessed to a total of 11 murders. Recently, on October 8, 2022, Peter passed away in the hospital. On May 25, 2009, an emergency call was to the services in Portland, USA, reporting a fire. When the fire was extinguished and firefighters the building, they discovered a horrifying scene. The room was surrounded by crosses and other religious objects. There lay a completely charred body. However, the most terrifying part was that the corpse was headless. Zoe Saraki was born on March 25, 1991, in Portland, located in Cumberland County, Maine, in the northwestern United States. She grew up with her loving parents John and Linda Saraki, her older brother Gregory, and two half-sisters from her father's side. Zoe always maintained good relationships with them. John Saraki was a builder, and thanks to his job, he supported the family well. From an early age, Zoe was surrounded by creative stimuli and showed a strong inclination towards art. She also loved animals and had 5 cats at home. As Zoe grew older, she became increasingly restless and curious. The idea of traveling and experiencing other cultures fascinated her. She also started following a vegan diet, consuming only vegetables while avoiding meat and animal products. This lifestyle included an ecological culture of protecting animals, the environment, and health. In 2005, Zoe started attending high school, where she had a large group of friends who described her as a happy, joyful, and positive girl. In 2008, on her 17th birthday, Zoe surprised everyone with a decision that her parents did not like. She dropped out of school. Ken Coonan, the principal of the school Zoe attended, said that the girl refused to talk and discuss why she did not want to finish her junior year. Ken remembered Zoe as very nice, and according to him, her classmates spoke highly of her. He added that she interacted a lot with other energetic and creative young people like herself. A few months after Zoe dropped out of school, she began working at a local bakery and coffee shop named Bagel Works. On March 25, 2009, her 18th birthday, she eagerly awaited getting a tattoo on one of her arms. Zoe had always admired the Austrian artist Gustav Klimt's work, and when it came time to choose a tattoo design, she was inspired by his artistry. Little did she know that this decision, intended to mark her transition into adulthood, would introduce her to someone who would profoundly impact her future. Zoe knew exactly what she wanted on her arm, so she headed to a tattoo parlor in the Old Port area. There she met Chad Gurney, a 27-year-old tattoo artist. They seemed to connect instantly. A few days after their initial meeting, Zoe agreed to be Chad's girlfriend. The 9-year age difference didn't bother her at all. Chad was indeed a distinctive individual. He attended high school in Wells, Maine, where he made a name for himself as a lacrosse goalie, a sport involving 2 teams using small rubber balls and long-handled sticks. After high school, Chad moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, to study at Liberty University. This institution is well known for being led by the famous evangelist, Pastor Jerry Falwell. Chad's body was adorned with numerous tattoos, each telling its own story. His skin featured dozens of drawings, most depicting aliens. One particularly striking piece was a gray-toned crocodile. In the realm of tattoos, alien imagery can signify two things: a belief in extraterrestrial beings or a reflection of the wearer's sense of individuality, indicating they don't fit into this world, but are unique and original. The reptile tattoo symbolized danger and hostility, a predator best avoided. In addition to his love for tattoos, Chad was also passionate about underground and alternative dance forms, known as hardcore dance. This genre involves intense and sometimes aggressive movements, but requires complete bodily control. It's not about self-harm. It's about releasing energy through various physical expressions like lunges, jumps, and acrobatic stunts that few dare to try. Those who knew Chad mentioned his struggle with recovering from a severe car accident 4 years prior, before his move to Portland in 2005. His resilience painted him as both intriguing and complex, a man marked by his past, yet continuously moving forward towards new experiences. Chad suffered significant injuries in Alabama when the Liberty team was on their way to a lacrosse game. Local van, carrying both players and coaches, was rear-ended by a car and forced into oncoming traffic where it collided with a large truck. The severe impact ejected Chad from the vehicle, leading to a near loss of his leg and necessitating approximately 20 surgeries. Due to a strong head injury, Chad underwent psychiatric evaluation, which revealed he had cognitive impairments affecting his speech, memory, and mathematical thinking. Chad gained financial independence through the 7-figure sum he received from a lawsuit following the accident. 2 years later, in 2007, he sought treatment for anxiety and depression, eventually being diagnosed with both an organic personality disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. In 2009, Chad traveled alone to Hawaii with plans to continue exploring the world. This passion for travel and curiosity about other cultures led him to meet Zoe. The couple adopted a relaxed and unconventional approach after they began dating. Zoe and Chad agreed on an open relationship, allowing them to see other people. In May 2009, Chad traveled again, this time for a weekend in Vancouver, Canada. Upon his return to Portland, Zoe admitted that she had been with another man during his absence and allegedly had sexual relations. Initially, it appeared that Chad was untroubled by this incident of infidelity due to their open relationship agreement. However, following this confession, Chad began insisting that Zoe quit her job and join him on a personal spiritual quest in Thailand. She declined his proposal, without suspecting the grave outcome it could have. On May 25, 2009, Zoe visited Chad's apartment feeling very tired and decided to take a nap. While she was asleep, Chad grabbed her by the neck, struck her on the head, and strangled her until she ceased breathing. Then he engaged in sexual activity with Zoe's lifeless body before decapitating her, according to records. After committing the heinous crime, Chad took a shower, got dressed, and drove to the nearest gas station, where he filled a canister with gasoline. He returned to his apartment and doused Zoe's body on the lower floor with gasoline, laying a trail to the front door before igniting the fire. Chad took a backpack he had packed for a trip to Thailand along with a laptop and shotgun. When the apartment caught fire, he went to an ATM, withdrew cash, and checked into the Old Orchard Beach Motel. There, he got into a jacuzzi and waited. Meanwhile, a call was made to 911 emergency services about the fire. Authorities responded immediately and were able to extinguish the flames. Upon entering the building, they were confronted with a horrific scene. Among the ashes lay a charred corpse surrounded by crosses and other religious items. A neighbor quickly called Chad to inform him that his house had burned down. The young man replied that he wasn't in town as he had gone to his hometown of Lewiston, and then quickly hung up the phone. On Tuesday, May 26th, Chad spoke with his best friend and confessed that he had killed Zoe. While explaining what happened, he seemed calm and rational. Chad said he was tired of the pain and couldn't restrain himself anymore. As he talked to his friend, he drove through the streets of Portland and carelessly ran a red light. A nearby city police officer stopped him. Chad insisted that his friend explain over the phone to the officer, who had pulled him over, that Chad had been in an accident in 2005, which might have caused mental health issues. After this interaction with the officer and talking to his friend, Chad went to the police and confessed to Zoe's murder. The police confiscated Chad's belongings, and on his computer's hard drive, A computer crimes investigator found a video recording labeled "woman half decapitated" for suspected infidelity. At least if she cheated, she won't do it again. This evidence was later admitted in court on Wednesday, May 27th. At the high school where Zoe had studied, her memory was honored with a moment of silence during classes. Teachers and students were informed about the incident during lunch. That same day, a room was set up in the school where social workers and counselors were available for grieving students. After some time, Christine Koo, Zoe's stepsister, made the first statement on behalf of the family. She told local media journalists that she wanted the public to know this was an unusual murder because Chad had committed many evil acts. According to Christine, detectives told her that in a rage, Chad had attacked Zoe, sexually violated her body, and set it on fire. Then he calmly went to a motel and got into a jacuzzi. A week after Zoe's murder, on Tuesday, June 2, 2009, a vigil was held in front of the apartment building where Chad had lived. It was a moment of consolation for Zoe's friends and family. Many strangers shocked and outraged by the brutal crime also attended. Estimates suggest that over 150 people gathered to pray and remember Zoe. They also placed candles and flowers on the steps of the building where her life was tragically cut short. Zoe's father, J.N., and her stepsister, Courtney, came to the scene of the tragedy and were touched by the support of so many people. Meanwhile, the police began interviewing Chad's friends and acquaintances who agreed that the young man had a split personality. According to them, he sometimes portrayed himself as a person on a spiritual quest with religious artifacts throughout his apartment and plans to travel to Thailand to study Eastern religions. Some said that Chad was kind and charming, often giving people small gifts. They mentioned that he often spoke of wanting to use money he received from an accident for the good of humanity. At the same time, Chad enjoyed his image as a tough guy with tattoos covering his arms and provocative confrontational behavior. Robert Collins, a 24-year-old chef, noticed something peculiar about Chad. When Chad attended parties, people often shrugged and turned away. Robert recalled Chad once confiding in him that the only thing he identified with was pain. He even remembered that Chad had this word tattooed on his knuckles. The police and prosecution made significant efforts to gather information about the brutal crime. Deputy Attorney General Bill Stokes reported that the judge had ordered the seizure of court documents. Steve Weir, who rented an apartment from Chad in 2006, was also questioned. He mentioned seeing religious paintings and artifacts in Chad's apartment and said Chad expressed an interest in theology but did not practice it. Watson Atkinson, owner of another tattoo parlor in Portland, shared that Chad once confessed he wanted to use his accident compensation to find himself. Watson added that Chad seemed overly focused on teenage girls. This concerned him so much that he forbade his 16-year-old daughter from interacting with Chad. Watson also noted that none of Chad's close acquaintances could have imagined how dark his thoughts were. During the initial investigation, Chad's prior medical history and mental health diagnoses were revealed. However, while in custody, several psychologists evaluated Chad and found no evidence of delusions or hallucinations. In conversations with specialists, Chad admitted having strong feelings regarding Zoe's infidelity and expressed disappointment over it. According to court documents, he claimed to be weary of the infidelity of all his girlfriends. These conversations revealed a depressed individual who began contemplating taking Zoe's life after she confessed her unfaithfulness to him. Chad told 3 different psychologists that he engaged in sexual acts with her remains because he believed he had already committed terrible act and was contemplating what worst thing he could do next. When his trial began, a 127-minute police interrogation conducted 12 hours after the crime was leaked. During the interrogation with Detective Danham, Chad said that he and Zoe got along very well. He noted that she occasionally stayed in his apartment for about a week and that they had no arguments. Chad claimed they were soulmates and that she always tried to be honest with him. He stated that he had taken the life of the most beautiful girl he ever knew and added that he owed it to his 18-year-old victim to tell the truth. During the conversation with the detective, Chad remained composed, constantly apologized, and cried several times. Chad recounted that on May 25, 2009, Zoe was napping. According to him, he approached and began to strangle her. She tried to fight for her life and screamed for him to stop. Chad said that when Zoe tried to resist, he hit her on the head and continued to strangle her until she stopped breathing. He then described the atrocities he committed with her body. At this point in the interrogation, Chad stated that he used 3 knives not a samurai sword, as initially thought, for the decapitation. He added that he then placed a cross between her legs and talked about everything he did while her body burned in the apartment. Describing the events, Chad constantly called himself a terrible person. When asked why he decapitated Zoe, he replied that he was trying to turn her death into a ritual of forgiveness. When asked why he did it, Chad struggled to find an answer. He then stated that he felt possessed and that on the day of Zoe's murder, everything in his life dimmed. He explained that for several hours, he became a wild, primitive beast in his basic instincts, and that's why he committed such a monstrous act. This interrogation became an important piece of evidence presented in Cumberland County Supreme Court during the initial hearings. Prosecutors played the entire 2.5-hour recording for Judge Roland Cole. There was discussion that Chad faced a minimum of 25 years in prison and a maximum of life imprisonment. During one of the hearings in 2011, it was proposed that acknowledging his mental disorder could result in his transfer to a psychiatric center in Austria. It was established that the accused had strangled the victim in a fit of anger. However, it remained uncertain whether Chad, who waived his right to a jury trial, agreed with this at the time. Pros argued that the former Liberty University student and lacrosse champion was fully aware of his actions. They brought in a psychiatrist and psychologist to testify about Chad's mental state. All of them concluded that the young man knew what he was doing and understood his decision to brutally kill his girlfriend. The defense, however, continued to emphasize Chad's mental health issues, arguing that he was ashamed and afraid of losing control over himself. On January 11, 2012, Chad's attorney tried to convince the Supreme Court to dismiss evidence found on his client's personal computer at the time of arrest. This evidence included a gruesome video where Chad explained how to decapitate an unfaithful woman. The defense contended that this video should not have been admitted into evidence. In March 2012, nearly 3 years after the egregious crime, 30-year-old Chad Gurney was sentenced to 50 years for the murder of Zoe Saraki and 25 years for arson. The judge ordered these sentences be served consecutively. Chad's lawyers filed an appeal against the sentence, but it was rejected. Zoe's family had hoped for a life sentence. During sentencing, the presiding judge stated it was clear that the defendant did not perceive reality normally. However, the issue was whether he understood his actions were wrong. Sarah Churchill, Chad's attorney, argued before the Supreme Court that brain concussions and other injuries from a 2005 accident left her client in a constant state of delusion. She claimed the judge erred by finding Chad guilty because the search warrant should not have extended to his smartphone, laptop, and social media pages. Churchill argued that instead of considering evidence from these devices, significant weight should have been given to evidence regarding Chad's psychosis and alienation at the time of the crime. The Deputy Attorney General countered by stating that Chad killed Zoe in retaliation for her infidelity, which he deemed dishonored as betrayal. The deputy noted that no information from social networks was used against Chad and concluded there was overwhelming evidence proving he knew what he did during the crime. Afterward, Zoe's aunt, Kathy Kozev, told journalists she felt breathless seeing and hearing him during trial, recalling her niece's agonizing final moments vividly. Annie Tayan, a 24-year-old young mother, vanished mysterious circumstances. According to her partner, she abruptly left him and their newborn daughter without any explanation for her departure. The search for Annie extended over 4 years with ongoing efforts to locate her, but no immediate results. Annie Tayan, born on May 1, 1965, was raised by her mother. She had a love for, enjoyed dancing and fun activities, and cherished simple joys. Annie always dreamed of having a large family and saw motherhood as her primary goal in life. She embraced this role early, welcoming her first son Jimmy at the age of 18, and then her second son Sean just a year later. By the age of 20, she had also given birth to her third child, a daughter named Shane. Tragically, shortly after Shane's birth, the children's father decided not to participate in their upbringing and left the family. This abandonment left Annie facing the challenges of being a single parent to 3 young children while living in a rented apartment in Maine. In 1987, when Shane was just 6 months old and Annie was 22 years old, she met Michael Palin. He was a 32-year-old Navy petty officer, serving on the aircraft carrier Bramby. Their paths crossed in Portland, Maine, where Michael's ship was docked. Michael quickly became taken with Annie during an encounter at the waterfront. Living in Charleston, South Carolina, Michael was highly respected in the Navy for his work as a computer systems operator. He actively participated in military operations and had been recognized with several awards. Annie found herself deeply attracted to Michael's naval career and soon fell in love with him. She confided to a friend that she believed she had found a man worthy of her love. After dating for several months and developing their relationship further, Annie and Michael decided to live together as a family unit along with her 2 sons and daughter. However, their shared life took an unfortunate turn when a fire broke out in their apartment. At that time, Annie wasn't home. Michael was alone with the children. While Michael managed to escape along with Jimmy and Sean who could walk, Shane, being too young, sadly didn't make it out alive. After returning, Annie tried to go back into the burning apartment to rescue Shane. However, neighbors restrained her. The loss of Shane due to the fire left a significant impact on Annie. She shared that this tragic event created an irreplaceable void in her heart. As authorities started investigating the fire, experts faced difficulties in determining the exact cause of ignition. The circumstances were highly suspicious to investigators. Even with these suspicions, the investigation concluded without assigning responsibility to any individual. Following the devastating fire, Annie Tayan moved with her sons to her mother's residence in Portland. Meanwhile, Michael Palin immersed himself in work and chose to live in the barracks. A few months later, another alarming incident happened near Annie's mother's house. A shed in the backyard caught fire. Investigators quickly identified the fire's origin and discovered a lighter engraved with Bramby, the name of Michael Palin's ship. This evidence pointed toward Michael as a prime suspect. Despite this suggestive evidence, police couldn't conclusively prove his involvement because of insufficient proof. After this second fire incident, child welfare authorities in Maine determined that Annie Tayan's sons were in a potentially dangerous situation under her care. Consequently, they decided to remove Jamie and Sean from their mother's custody and place them under foster care administered by social services. This decision left Annie devastated as she fervently tried to regain custody of her children. Despite all her efforts, she couldn't do so, inflicting profound emotional distress and leaving her heartbroken over being separated from her sons. When Michael's ship returned to Charleston, South Carolina, he rented an apartment and reconnected with Annie despite their tumultuous past. Annie agreed to communicate with him and eventually moved in with him to Goose Creek, a suburb of Charleston where they lived as a couple. However, Annie's stay was soon marred by a startling discovery. She found a photograph of Michael wearing a wedding ring, revealing his marital status. Confronted with the photograph, Michael admitted to Annie that he was married but had been long divorced. He disclosed that his ex-wife, Dawn Breeze, and their 3 children resided in his mother's house in Savannah, Georgia. Despite Michael's reassurances of no ongoing relationship with Dawn, Annie was shaken by the revelation. She contemplated leaving him, but ultimately decided to stay, still seeing Michael as an ideal partner for starting a family. Their cohabitation, however, soon turned sour. Michael's behavior towards Annie grew increasingly hostile and demeaning. Annie, planning to return to her mother's house, discovered she was pregnant. This news led her to reconsider her plans to leave, filled with the joy of expecting another child. In October 1989, a month before her disappearance, Annie gave birth to her 4th daughter, Jade. Though Annie knew Jade could never replace her lost daughter, she felt Jade filled a significant void in her heart. Yet in the month following Jade's birth, Michael's treatment of Annie deteriorated further. He resorted to openly insulting and humiliating her. Annie confided in a friend about her fear of Michael's relentless pursuit if she attempted to flee. Michael's controlling behavior escalated. He confined Annie to their apartment while he was at work, disconnecting the phone and placing it in his briefcase. Annie was increasingly alarmed by Michael's actions. Just 2 days before her vanishing act, in a state of distress, Annie reached out to her close friend Katie French via phone call. In the call, Annie revealed to Katie that she had disclosed her intention to leave Michael. However, Michael had retorted that if she left, their daughter Jade would remain with him. Annie found herself in a desperate situation, overwhelmed with emotion. She urgently pleaded with Katie to come immediately and rescue both her and her daughter Jade. Unfortunately, Katie was preoccupied and could not come to her aid. Instead, she sent Annie money for a bus ticket, hoping it would enable her to escape and return to Portland. Unbeknownst to them, this heartfelt conversation would be their last exchange. 2 days later, on November 7, 1989, Katie attempted to contact Annie, but received no response. Several days passed before Michael Palin informed Katie that on November 6th, Annie had gathered her belongings and departed in an unknown direction. Expecting Annie to reach out from her new location, Katie waited anxiously. However, 2 weeks went by with no word. By Thanksgiving on November 24th, Annie had been unreachable for 20 days. Growing increasingly concerned, Katie contacted all of Annie's friends and acquaintances, but found that no one had any information about her whereabouts. She then tried to report 24-year-old Annie as missing to the police, but was informed that she could not file an official report since she was not a blood relative. Months passed without any sign of Annie. Eventually, Katie obtained the phone number of Michael Palin's mother. Upon contacting her, Katie was shocked to learn that Jade was in her care. This revelation confirmed Katie's worst fears. She knew Annie would never leave her daughter behind willingly. Despite the concerning developments, Michael Palin displayed a notable lack of concern regarding Annie's disappearance. He made no apparent efforts to engage with law enforcement or initiate a search for her whereabouts, and soon received a transfer to the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Months following Annie's disappearance, the search for her was finally launched after a report from her mother prompted official action. The initial focus of the investigation was her live-in partner, Michael Palin, who quickly emerged as the primary suspect. Michael detailed that on the morning of November 6th, he had woken to find Annie gone, having left their daughter in his care. He recounted that the previous night, Annie had expressed a desire to end their relationship. Michael did not attempt to find Annie, believing that their relationship had conclusively ended and further communication was unnecessary. He also claimed to be unaware of her being reported missing or of her lack of contact with family and friends. Upon inspecting the couple's rented apartment, police found no evidence, such as traces, clues, or suspicious items that could provide leads in the case. Annie Tarn's case seemed to have hit a dead end with no large-scale search initiated for the young woman. Her whereabouts, whether she was still alive, and the potential motives of any abductor remained mysteries. The only certain detail was that the last person reported to have seen her was her live-in partner, Michael. For an arduous span of 4 years, there was no news or sightings of Annie. Katie French, her close friend, remained the sole active seeker, tirelessly cooperating with the investigation. Katie invested approximately $16,000 in phone bills alone, employed a private detective, and was steadfast in her determination to continue the search. She reached out to various organizations that could potentially provide insight into Michael Palin's background. Katie personally held a strong belief that Michael was a dangerous individual and should not be trusted. She harbored a deep fear of him, aware that if Michael became aware of her involvement with the police, it could potentially put her in harm's way. In 1993, a significant development occurred in Annie Tan's case, as it was transferred to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, marking a pivotal shift in the investigation. The NCIS agents initiated a comprehensive re-examination of the case, starting from scratch. They found Michael Palin at the naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. When police agents approached him to discuss Annie Tan's disappearance, Michael said he would only talk if his was present. Later, he stopped cooperating altogether. He refused to give any more help or information. The Marine police gathered all the details they could about missing Annie. They then reached out to South Carolina law enforcement. They asked them to check their records for any unidentified bodies, noting that Annie had given birth a month before she went missing. The South Carolina police shared a case about a deceased woman who also gave birth just a month before her death. They provided a sketch of this woman's face, which shocked the Marine police agents when they saw it. They were sure they'd found Annie. The scene revealed a violent murder. Her body was found beside a highway in Jasper County, South Carolina, about 100 miles from where she lived with Michael. The crime scene photos were horrifying, showing a rare level of violence. Annie's face was severely damaged and her skull was broken into 124 pieces, requiring nearly 500 hours of careful work to reconstruct it. Annie's body had been put in a naval bag soaked in gasoline and set on fire. The burning bag was found at 6 a.m. on November 7, 1989, the same time Katie French noticed Annie stopped answering her calls. A match of dental records confirmed the woman's identity as Annie Tan. With this discovery, Michael Palin became the prime suspect in her murder right away. Marine police agents set up a detailed investigation plan, which started with examining his financial activities closely. On the day Annie vanished, investigators found that Michael made a credit card purchase about 25 miles south of where her char remains were found. Digging into his phone records, they discovered that on November 6th, he had made 2 calls to his mother's house in Savannah. The first call was at 4:35 a.m., and the second one at 5:17 a.m. With this evidence, agents hypothesized that Michael may have killed Annie in their apartment, then moved her body to the roadside, where he set it on fire. To push forward with the investigation, NCIS agents aimed to find Michael Palin's ex-wife, Dawn Breeze. At the time of Annie's death, Dawn was still married to Michael and living at his mother's house in Savannah. After Annie disappeared, Dawn divorced Michael and started moving around a lot, living in different states as if she were avoiding something or someone. Eventually, agents tracked her down in Miami, Florida during the summer of 1995. That was almost 6 years after Annie had been murdered. At this point, Dawn had become involved with spiritual practices for income. When agents contacted her at work to discuss Annie's disappearance, her calm response was surprising. She even asked how long they'd talk because she wanted to know if she'd have time to eat. Her reaction wasn't what the agents expected. They thought she'd be more emotional when talking about Annie. Despite being calm during their interaction, inconsistencies began appearing during a lengthy 10-hour interrogation. Initially, Dawn's story matched Michael Palin's version. She said Michael told her that his mistress had left and that he planned to raise their daughter by himself when she visited his apartment. However, inconsistencies emerged regarding when exactly she visited Michael's apartment. At one point during the questioning, Dawn became silent for a moment and looked down before expressing a wish to tell the truth. In a surprisingly emotionless manner, without any tears, she proceeded to share information she had kept hidden for 6 years. Dawn recounted that early one morning, Michael urgently summoned her to his Charleston apartment. Upon arrival, Dawn discovered Annie Tayan's lifeless body on the living room floor. Michael donned to go to the bedroom to meet his daughter. At that time, Dawn and Michael were still legally married and shared 3 children. Michael confessed his affair with Annie to Dawn, explaining that it had led to the birth of a daughter. He pleaded with her to accept the child and assist him in raising her. According to Dawn, Michael, unwilling to engage in a custody battle with Annie, opted for murder as a more straightforward solution. On the night transitioning from November 5th to 6th, 1989, Michael and Annie went to bed. After a moment of intimacy, Annie fell asleep. It was then that Michael took a crowbar and began to strike her viciously. Tragically, their daughter, Jade, was lying next to Annie on the bed throughout this horrific act. Michael relentlessly hit Annie on the head, each blow more brutal than the last. Despite her strength, Annie eventually succumbed to her injuries right there in the bed. In a chilling turn of events, Michael reached out to his wife, Dawn, requesting her urgent presence. He then placed Annie's body in a naval bag and transferred it to the trunk of his car, where he had also stored a canister of gasoline. He positioned both his wife and daughter in the car's back seat, before embarking on a lengthy drive of approximately 100 miles. Upon finding a secluded spot by the roadside, Michael removed Annie's body from the trunk, drenched it in gasoline, and set it ablaze. After ensuring that the fire had taken hold, he hurriedly returned to the car and drove Dawn and Jade back to his mother's house in Savannah. Dawn Breeze's revelation provided a pivotal turn in the investigation, marking the first substantial evidence since the discovery of Annie's remains. The investigators then requested Dawn make a monitored phone call to her ex-husband Michael, discussing Annie Tahan's murder. She consented and contacted him accordingly. Michael indicated the need for a serious conversation, as Annie's body had been located and identified. Michael's response, "No, they didn't do that," suddenly confirmed to the agents the veracity of Dawn's account. In the call, Dawn also informed Michael that blood had been detected in their former apartment, and the NCIS suspected them of involvement in the murder. She urged Michael to devise an explanation for the blood found in the apartment. Michael's reply, "Okay, we need to work together and come up with something," did not include any direct admissions, yet his demeanor suggested a clear understanding of the context of their discussion. He refrained from asking unnecessary questions or offering denials, implying his awareness of the situation. This interaction solidified the theory that Han had been murdered in Michael's apartment. Towards the end of their conversation, Michael advised Dawn to be cautious with her phone communications, insisting they would collaboratively manage the situation. NCIS agents took Dawn Breeze to the crime scene to unearth any remaining evidence. To protect her identity and ensure her safety as a cooperating witness, they disguised her before the visit. At the apartment, Dawn meticulously recounted and demonstrated the positioning of Annie's body and sequence of events. She pointed out an area near a wall and baseboard where there had been a significant accumulation of blood, affecting both carpet and concrete floor beneath it. Since Michael had vacated the apartment, landlords had replaced and cleaned carpets multiple times, explaining absence of visible traces. However, when police applied a special chemical to concrete floor, a large purple stain appeared indicative of protein presence, aligning with Dawn's account where Annie's body had lain. Despite blood seeping into concrete, NCIS faced challenges in conclusively proving substance to be blood. Consequently, search for additional physical evidence continued. Dawn also mentioned a nightstand with television near bed, where Annie was killed. According to her, television had been splattered with blood during murder, and Michael mentioned its need for extensive cleaning due to stains. He later disposed of television, possibly selling rather than discarding it. Michael's pursuit of a functional appliance, considering his frugal nature, felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Despite this, the agents were resolute in their efforts to locate it. By this point, Michael Palin had become aware of the NCIS surveillance, especially after a phone call with his ex-wife, Dawn. This realization triggered paranoia, making him acutely conscious of NCIS monitoring activities. The NCIS agents were concerned that Michael might attempt to flee, coerce witnesses, or potentially inflict harm on others. In a dramatic turn of events during one surveillance mission, Michael tried to evade the authorities. However, his attempt was unsuccessful, as the police swiftly caught him. Consequently, on October 11, 1995, Michael Palin was apprehended and taken into custody. While held in a military prison under suspicion of murder, NCIS agents diligently worked to locate and interview all residents of the apartment complex where the murder took place in November 1989. Their perseverance paid off 3 months later when they encountered a neighbor who disclosed he had purchased a television from Michael. Remarkably, the television was still operational and present in his home. The police promptly seized the television and dispatched it to the FBI laboratory for a thorough forensic analysis. To their significant breakthrough, the examination revealed 11 blood spots inside the speaker. These blood samples were identified as matching Annie Tayan's DNA, providing a critical piece of evidence in the ongoing murder investigation. At this stage of the case, Michael Palin's legal representatives announced his willingness to enter a guilty plea if the death penalty was set aside. Even though the prosecutor was unhappy with the way things turned out, military law required that such an agreement be made during the trial. Michael Palin admitted his guilt without showing much emotion. He wrecked the details of his crime with a detachment that was unsettling, almost like reading off a mundane list. His narrative lacked any signs of remorse or empathy. As a result, Michael Palin was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, with chance for parole after 30 years. He also received a dishonorable discharge from the Navy. Despite knowing about her husband's crime and staying silent for 6 years, Dawn Breeze avoided legal consequences due to her crucial confession to NCIS. This confession significantly helped advance the investigation. Annie's children, her sons and daughter, have been informed about their biological mother's tragic fate. They understand she did not abandon them. Jade, the daughter Annie had with Michael, has grown into a beautiful woman within the Palmer family. She has notably kept no relationship with her father. In a surprising development, Michael Palin was released from prison in 2013 after serving just 17 years due to good behavior. His exact location is currently unknown. It's advised that anyone who comes into contact with him should exercise caution. When Ronald Vinci, a millionaire, first encountered Catherine Pelleggi, a flight attendant, he felt an immediate sense of love. Little did he know their chance meeting in the skies would ultimately shape their future. Born on August 16, 1940, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Ronald Vinci displayed an entrepreneurial spirit from an early age. In his 20s, he started his first business venture by renting a space on the Pacific coast in San Diego to sell Honda motorcycles. Over time, his small shop grew into one of California's largest Honda dealerships. Ron's success didn't stop there. He opened several more car dealerships, steadily increasing his earnings. Those who worked for Vinci often described him as resolute and strong-willed, as well as a demanding employer. Ronald Vinci's personal life included a previous marriage to Pamela. Together they had a son named Carrie. However, their marriage ended in divorce after several years. Following his divorce, Ron indulged in a lavish lifestyle and spent his wealth on extravagant toys. He developed a passion for collecting airplanes and helicopters, even acquiring a large hangar to house his collection. Ronald resided in a spacious house located in Rancho Santa Fe, California. He went to great lengths to obtain permission from the county commission to construct a helicopter pad on his property, despite objections from neighbors. This allowed him to commute conveniently by helicopter directly from home. Additionally, helicopter pads were installed on the roofs of his car dealerships to further facilitate aerial transportation. In 1990, the paths of 50-year-old Ronald Vinci and 34-year-old Catherine Pileggi crossed unexpectedly in the skies. Catherine was working as a flight attendant when they first met. Catherine Pileggi hailed from a close-knit family and grew up in rural Georgia. During her youth, she participated in beauty pageants and won hearts with her charm and grace. With charisma and a radiant smile, her beauty and pleasant demeanor attracted many admirers and suitors. After finishing her education, Catherine spent several years working as a lab technician in a veterans hospital. However, her aspirations were beyond this job, and she always yearned for more in life. In 1980, Catherine made a significant career change by leaving the hospital and joining Delta Airlines as a flight attendant. At that time, her annual income was $20,000. She enjoyed her new job, tending to passengers' needs and serving meals. Catherine even had some practical knowledge, like using coffee grounds to eliminate unpleasant odors, a handy tip for dealing with spills on airplane seats. In 1990, a decade after starting her flight attendant career, Catherine had a fateful encounter on a flight. She met Ronald Vinci, a millionaire who was immediately drawn to her charming and ever-smiling personality. Despite the significant 14-year age gap between them, the two began a romantic relationship. Catherine then left her career as a flight attendant and moved into Ronald's luxurious home in California. They shared a passion for travel, often visiting Aspen, Colorado, a favorite getaway spot for them. Their relationship spanned 10 years, during which Ronald never proposed to Catherine. Eventually, they chose to part ways. Seeking a fresh start and new companionship, Catherine relocated to Florida in April 2001 at the age of 45. She began a relationship with 63-year-old Dilio Carano, an insurance agent who was financially well off. The couple met through mutual friends. Catherine confided in Dilio about her previous relationship with Ronald Vinci, describing it as tumultuous and unhappy. She revealed that during the decade-long relationship with Ronald, she endured insults from him and had to deal with his heavy drinking and public discussions of his affairs with other women, all while hoping for a marriage proposal that never came from Ronald Vinci. On the contrary, wasted no time and swiftly proposed to Catherine. The couple tied the knot in May 2001, just a month after they first met. Catherine seemed very happy with the marriage. After their wedding, they began living together in Miami Beach, Florida. Dilio described Catherine's early demeanor in their shared life as resembling that of a domestic cat, gentle, calm, and quiet, with minimal eating habits. Furthermore, Catherine had a profound fear of water. She couldn't bathe in the ocean or river without experiencing intense anxiety upon entering the water. A few months into their marriage, Dilio began to notice a significant change in his wife's behavior. She increasingly requested money from him, demanding funds for clothes and gifts, while comparing him to her friends' more generous husbands. Dilio estimated that Catherine was withdrawing approximately $55,000 monthly from him. She used educational expenses as an excuse, but failed to provide receipts or evidence of such expenditures. After several months of enduring this financial strain, Dilio decided he had rushed into the marriage and wanted a divorce. Given their lack of children or shared property, the separation was relatively straightforward. Court documents revealed that Dilio Carano had a net worth of $4.5 million, whereas Catherine had only $8,000 in her accounts. As Catherine prepared to move out of Dilio's house, she expressed sadness and despair, lamenting, "I don't succeed in anything. There's just no meaning in my life." In 2005, Ronald Vinci, a millionaire, made a significant life change by relocating to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Convinced by friends that Florida offered favorable climate conditions and low taxes, at this point, Ron had already sold his car dealerships and accumulated substantial wealth. In Fort Lauderdale, he acquired a luxurious apartment on the 4th floor, enjoying his new residence's comforts. In the same year, Ronald rekindled his relationship with Catherine Pileggi. Catherine, the flight attendant Ron had previously dated, moved into his apartment, rekindling their relationship. Interestingly, Catherine's ex-husband, Dilio Carano, also lived in the same building, but was situated 30 floors below them. Dilio couldn't comprehend why Catherine chose to reconnect with the millionaire she once described as a monster. As their relationship progressed, Catherine became increasingly fixated on marrying Ron. Both Ronald and Catherine were no longer working and led a leisurely lifestyle. Their differences became more evident over time. Ronald was overweight and enjoyed indulging in rich foods. In contrast, Catherine maintained a weight of only 42 kilograms by eating sparingly. Ronald loved lively parties, while Catherine preferred staying home absorbed in crime stories. She rarely wore dresses, opting for shorts and sneakers instead. The couple often traveled together, crossing the sea by boat and visiting Caribbean islands by air. Despite her fear of the ocean, detailed in her diary entries, Ron incessantly encouraged her to conquer her phobia. Even though Ronald possessed considerable wealth, he had a penchant for frequenting budget-friendly bars along the Fort Lauderdale waterfront with friends. There, he would order 1 tacos and strong drinks. He might have been the life of these gatherings, flirting with women, but he often humorously remarked that his appeal to men had long vanished. Their home frequently hosted gatherings where Ronald indulged in alcohol and grew more outspoken. Occasionally, he publicly insulted Catherine in front of their friends, implying she owed everything to him. At these events, Catherine usually played a passive role, quietly catering to Ronald's intoxicated demands, serving drinks and snacks, and attending to his friends' needs. This dynamic painted a clearer picture of their contrasting personalities and relationship intricacies. Ron's extroverted indulgence versus Catherine's introverted submissiveness. For 5 years, this pattern persisted. However, the millionaire remained hesitant to propose marriage to Catherine. By 2010, Ronald began confiding in friends about his desire to end the e-keeling and seek a younger companion. In early 2011, Ronald Vinci found himself hospitalized due to severe intestinal issues. These issues were most likely stemming from years of alcohol abuse. The doctors attributed his illness to alcohol consumption, but Vinci noted a recent shift in the taste of his food. A friend jokingly suggested that maybe Catherine had tried to poison him. Ronald dismissed this jest without much thought. In reality, Ronald had neglected his health. His excessive alcohol intake and the habit of consuming numerous pills for relaxation and better sleep were taking a toll on his well-being. In June 2011, Ronald Vinci made a significant purchase, acquiring a new waterfront home in Fort Lauderdale valued at $3 million. Conveniently located just steps away from where his yacht was docked, the property promised comfort. At the age of 70, Ronald looked forward to spending the rest of his life in this residence. He eagerly anticipated visits from his only son, Carrie, and his grandson. Carrie's occupation as a waiter was a subject of jest for Ronald, who humorously claimed that Carrie was eagerly anticipating his father's passing. On the afternoon of June 28, 2011, the gardener of Ronald Vinci made a distressing call to 911, reporting an incident involving his employer. When the police arrived at the scene, they discovered the lifeless body of the millionaire in a guest bedroom. Shockingly, his body had been meticulously wrapped in plastic bags, tightly taped, and placed inside a sleeping bag along with soiled sheets. And on top of it all was a substance resembling wet dirt, later identified as coffee grounds. Further examination revealed a slashed mattress beneath the blanket on the bed. The gardener informed the police that according to Catherine Pileggi, Ronald had fallen down the stairs, suffered a head injury, and subsequently passed away. The officers had deep suspicions that Ronald Vinci's death was not accidental. During police interrogation, the gardener provided a chilling account of the events leading up to the discovery of Vinci's lifeless body. According to his testimony, Catherine Pileggi had called him late at night, urgently requesting his presence at Vinci's residence. Upon his arrival in the morning, he was confronted with the sight the millionaire's body wrapped tightly in a sleeping bag in one of the guest bedrooms. Catherine, distressed and tearful, implored the gardener to assist her in burying Ron. She revealed that Vinci had expressed a lifelong wish to be laid to rest in the ocean after his demise. To carry out this plan, she had purchased a blue container intended to hold Vinci's body, with the intention of taking it out to sea using the millionaire's yacht. By the time the gardener alerted authorities, Catherine had already brought this container home and placed it in the garage. Upon conducting a thorough examination, the medical examiner made gruesome findings. Ronald Vinci, aged 70, had sustained 9 stab wounds to his chest and neck. He bore marks consistent with hammer blows on his head and had ultimately met his demise from a gunshot wound to the head. On June 27th evening, Ronald Vinci's friends visited his house. Catherine prepared the meal, and Ron provided drinks during their gathering. During dinner, Ron mentioned that his passport and one of his pistols were missing. He also complained that the food tasted unusually bitter. Unexpectedly, Ron, who was known for staying up late, said he wasn't feeling well and went to bed as early as 7:30 p.m., an unusual time for him. His friends eventually found this early bedtime odd and left his house afterward. Catherine Pileggi, aged 54, was brought in for questioning a few hours later, where she provided a detailed confession. She recounted events around 1 a.m., shedding light on what transpired that fateful night. On June 28th, a drunk Ronald Vinci woke up and began verbally insulting Catherine. The situation escalated as he chased her down the stairs, stumbled and fell, hitting his head severely. Catherine claimed she helped him up and guided him to a guest bedroom on the first floor. Afterward, she cleaned the blood stains on the stairs. A few hours later, she entered the guest bedroom to check on Ron, finding him asleep with a loaded gun on the nightstand. Fearing that Vinci intended to kill her, Catherine acted out of fear and desperation. She grabbed the gun and fatally shot him in the head. During interrogation, Catherine admitted she was very scared and angrier than she had ever been before, feeling like her soul had left her body. After the shooting, she inflicted numerous additional wounds on Ron using a knife and a hammer. Catherine then wrapped his body in a bag and attempted to conceal the evidence by calling the gardener when she realized she couldn't dispose of the body alone. Surveillance camera photos showed Catherine purchasing a large blue container at a hardware store after the murder. This container was intended to be used for disposing of Ronald's body in the ocean. Authorities discovered a gun matching the one used to shoot Ronald in Catherine's car with her fingerprints on it. Her Bentley also contained incriminating items such as a knife, cut-up pieces of a mattress, clothing and rubber gloves, all stained with Ronald's blood. Consequently, Catherine faced a charge of first-degree murder and was subsequently arrested and detained. Further investigations revealed that just a month before the murder in May, Catherine had been involved in a legal dispute wherein her sister accused her of borrowing money but refusing to repay it. Catherine defended herself by claiming that the money was a gift and therefore refused to return it to her sister. On May 17th, the court ruled in favor of Catherine in this dispute. Ronald's neighbors reported hearing screams from Vinci's house on the night of the crime. Additionally, a witness spotted a white car with a large trailer near Vinci's home early in the morning. This car belonged to the gardener. Ronald Vinci's friends disclosed that he had been contemplating ending his relationship with Catherine for quite some time. The couple had not been intimate for several months, and even slept in separate rooms within their large house. Just a few weeks before the tragedy, attempted to give Catherine $1 million through one of his workers, requesting her to leave his house permanently. Prosecutors believed that Catherine's primary motive was the fear of losing her wealthy partner. However, Catherine's defense argued that she had been a victim of severe abuse during her relationship with Ronald and acted in self-defense. Questions arose regarding why she did not immediately contact the police, why she did not tell the truth right away, and why she endured the alleged abuse for years without leaving him. Some of Catherine's relatives defended her in court, and a court psychiatrist identified some signs of domestic violence. Nonetheless, none of Ronald's close associates could confirm witnessing any mistreatment in their relationship. They described Catherine as calm and noted that she never complained about her life. During the court proceedings, Catherine made a startling accusation against Ronald Vinci, claiming he was responsible for the sudden death of her younger sister Angela, 3 years prior, in December 2009. Catherine, Ronald and Angela had embarked on a Caribbean cruise together. Angela had been struggling with substance abuse issues and consumed excessive alcohol during a party on the cruise, leading to severe illness and intense convulsions. In an effort to help her sister, Catherine performed artificial respiration. Tragically, Angela's heart stopped beating, resulting in her death. It later emerged that Ronald had provided Angela with some pills on the evening of the cruise, presumably to help her relax. Catherine firmly believed these pills were a contributing factor in her younger sister's death. In 2014, a jury found Catherine Pgi guilty of the murder of Ronald Vinci. Consequently, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison. She is currently serving her sentence at the El Correctional Institution in Marin County, Florida. Her potential release date is set for January 2034, when she will be 77 years old. The story of successful and wealthy Ronald Vinci took a tragic turn due to his ill-fated relationship with quiet and unassuming flight attendant Catherine PGI. Despite his many wise decisions in life, this particular relationship ultimately proved to be a fatal error for the millionaire. A wealthy businesswoman, tired of solitude and possessing a significant fortune, met a charming anesthesiologist. He dreamed of finding his ideal partner. From their first encounter, there was a storm of passion between them. Not everyone, however, was pleased with the joy the eyes of this enamored pair. Deborah, the protagonist of our story, is a stylish, successful, and quite affluent woman. Her millions weren't luck, they were the result of her dedication and hard work. She spent years climbing in the interior design industry and eventually founded her own design firm, Ambrosia. Over 3 decades, Deborah poured herself into this venture with deep passion for her profession. However, her personal life didn't reflect this success. Although she married 4 times, each union ended in divorce. Despite being a devoted mother to her 4 children, her romantic relationships continually fell short. Having secured her financial future, Deborah yearned for something more essential, the simple joy of familial happiness. Her life took a significant turn due to a family tragedy several years ago when Cindy, her older sister, was killed by Billy Vickers in March 1984. During the trial, their mother testified against Cindy and supported Billy. Consequently, Vickers received a very light sentence and spent only a few years in prison for this horrible murder. Billy and Cindy had 2 kids, and this event deeply scarred them. Following this ordeal, Deborah faced extreme anxiety and developed panic attacks fearing firearms. Living alone for an extended period didn't help. Despite friends urging her to buy a pistol for protection, she couldn't tolerate having a weapon nearby. Deborah always took great care of her appearance and surrounded herself with beautiful things. She invested considerable time and money in skincare, makeup and hair care at this point in her life. She owned a variety of stylish items, including Chanel jewelry, Cartier watches, denim clothing, and Gucci shoes. The only thing she lacked was a devoted partner. John Mahan, a central character in our narrative, was born on February 3, 1958 in California. He grew up alongside his sisters Karen and Donna. His father, known for his deceitful and fraudulent behavior, imparted these traits to John early in life. John became involved in deceptive schemes and fraudulent activities to make a living. Additionally, he dealt in illegal substances and used them himself, which led to multiple confrontations with law enforcement and his eventual banishment from California in 1988. John completed his undergraduate studies at Arizona State University, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree. Later on, he joined the University of Dayton's law faculty. His friends nicknamed him Dirty John due to his ability to effortlessly attract women. John was notably handsome, standing around 6 feet 3 inches tall with hazel green eyes and thick dark hair. His engaging smile particularly appealed to women. After completing his academic journey, John met Tanya Sells, a nurse anesthetist by profession. They got married in November 1990 when she was 25 and he was 31. Their relationship was fundamentally based on falsehoods, as John kept Tanya isolated from his family, alleging their malevolence. Tanya supported her husband while attending medical school in Tennessee and helped him obtain his license as an anesthesiologist. The couple had 2 children. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Tanya discovered from John's mother and sisters that he had been deceiving her about his past. She also found his secret stash of pills stolen from patients in need, pills he himself was addicted to, which explained his temper. Tanya promptly reported this to the police. Following an investigation, John admitted to all charges but chose to flee the state instead of turning himself into authorities. He took refuge in a Michigan hotel where the police easily located him. John was found unconscious surrounded by empty pill containers, prompting them to summon an ambulance. While en route to the hospital, he regained consciousness, seized a medication vial, and leapt from the ambulance but was apprehended soon after. Subsequently, he received a 6-year prison sentence in Michigan for resisting arrest and illegal drug possession. However, remarkably, John served only 717 months behind bars. He somehow managed to have his sentence reduced and was freed in 2004. During this period of his life, he met Deborah. She was 55 and he was 59. They both decided to try online dating, which is how they eventually crossed paths. Deborah was impressed by John's online profile. He described himself as a divorced doctor and a Christian searching for love. After a series of disappointing dates, Deborah was pleasantly surprised when she met John. He showed genuine interest in her life, praised her accomplishments, and seemed different from others. Their first date happened in October 2014 at a restaurant called Houston in Irvine, California. John's aim was to captivate Deborah, and he did so by sharing fabricated tales of his past, like working with Doctors Without Borders in Iraq. He mentioned having 2 children and owning multiple properties. Deborah envisioned him as a selfless doctor devoted to global service. John treated her like royalty, which was exactly what Deborah longed for after seeking companionship for so long. He even expressed eagerness to meet her family. His charming words made Deborah's heart flutter. After leaving the restaurant, they ended up at her penthouse. However, John overstepped boundaries that night. After a few kisses, he tried to escalate things further. Deborah felt uncomfortable with the pressure and asked him to leave. The next morning, John sought to amend his mistake. He called Deborah to apologize, explaining that he had consumed too much alcohol and couldn't contain his emotions. This admission once again raised John's standing in Deborah's eyes, leading them to continue their dates. As their relationship progressed, Deborah and John spent more time together. On their third date, John declared his love and proposed. Deborah was so delighted by their companionship that she overlooked several peculiarities about him. For instance, John consistently wore well-worn medical scrubs, even at stylish events organized by Deborah, and claimed he had no time to change into more appropriate attire. Deborah was unfazed and proudly introduced him as her doctor to friends, posing with him for photos. Their bond deepened, and soon they decided to move in together. Deborah's daughter, Jason, who lived with her in the penthouse, was forthright and critical of her mother's partners. She disapproved of John's unkempt appearance, finding it strange that her mother, usually dressed in Gucci, was involved with someone in dirty robes. Jacqueline also noticed John's peculiar interest in the penthouse's art, statues and paintings, as if he were evaluating their worth. After just 5 weeks of knowing each other, John convinced Deborah they should live separately. They rented a house for $6,500 a month on Balboa Island's waterfront in Newport. Deborah paid $80,000 up front for several months' rent, while John avoided putting his name on the lease due to tax complications. Deborah was so enamored with John that she covered all expenses herself without informing her children. She couldn't understand why they disapproved of him as he pampered her like royalty, preparing morning coffee, doing grocery shopping, and striving to simplify her life. Deborah felt she had found her perfect match in John, and hoped that over time, her children would warm up to him. Envisioning a harmonious family future, Deborah arranged for John to meet her younger daughter Tara, who was known for having a softer disposition compared to Jacqueline. Tara resided in Las Vegas with her boyfriend, and upon hearing about John over the phone, decided to meet him in person. Tara's visit coincided with Deborah and John's move into their new residence. From their first encounter, Tara felt uneasy about John. His lack of cordiality combined with his silent, solitary efforts in moving belongings, trying to project a tough exterior, didn't sit well with her. Despite reservations, Tara was willing to give John the benefit of the doubt, yet quickly began observing some concerning signs. John didn't own a vehicle, and although he claimed to have properties in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, he never suggested relocating or even invited them to visit. John appeared to spend most of his days at home, often engrossed in video games. Just before Thanksgiving, Tara decided to snoop through her mother's boyfriend's belongings and found a nurse's certificate with his name, realizing he was not a doctor. When John found out about this, he became furious and threw a massive tantrum. He accused Tara of trying to deprive her mother of happiness, shouting that she wouldn't succeed in separating them, while Deborah just stood there listening. Eventually, there was a big argument, and Tara left the house. John used the situation to convince Deborah that her children were only after her wealth. They were waiting for her demise, and thus didn't want to see her happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's mother Arlene, a very religious woman, arrived. John put on an entire religious act in front of her, but received another scandal instead of approval. The holiday ended in another fiasco. Subsequently, Deborah opted to seek guidance from a psychotherapist who recommended establishing limits with her offspring and pursuing a tranquil existence, a suggestion she embraced. She and John made Balboa Island their home, indulging in local eateries, strolling about, and relishing the picturesque views. At times, John exhibited youthful exuberance, capturing bare-chested selfies and sharing them with her, engaging in playful activities which rejuvenated her spirit. Deborah was immensely joyful, yet remained apprehensive about John's attire. His wardrobe was limited to aged medical scrubs, loose frayed trousers, and worn-out shirts, whereas Deborah desired her partner to be fashionably attired and complement her way of life. John claimed his finer garments were pilfered during a stint in Iraq. Hence Deborah escorted him on a shopping spree, acquiring a complete set of high-end designer outfits for him. In early December, John accompanied Deborah on a work-related trip to Las Vegas. By this time, their acquaintance was just under 2 months old, yet they chose to marry. Deborah concealed this development from her children. On one occasion, an unknown woman managed to enter John and Deborah's residence. John seized this incident to persuade Deborah of the need for enhanced security measures. Subsequently, he set up multiple surveillance cameras within their home, which he operated via his smartphone. He extended this surveillance to his wife's office, aiming to monitor her activities. John's objective was to exert total control over their environment. Gradually, Deborah began to inquire about his family background and previous life. For each query, John had an immediate justification or excuse. Despite noticeable inconsistencies, Deborah chose to ignore them, convinced she had met her ideal partner. However, her children remained skeptical. Jacqueline took the initiative to investigate John's activities. Since he didn't own a vehicle, he utilized Deborah's Tesla. Jacqueline installed tracking devices on the car to monitor his whereabouts, but this surveillance didn't reveal anything significant. Then she and Tara engaged a private investigator. The detectives soon returned with findings. They uncovered that John had declared bankruptcy, possessed a nursing license, but not one for practicing medicine, and had resided in Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. One address associated with John was the Orange County Jail. When the daughters shared these discoveries with their mother, Deborah asserted that even if these facts were accurate, her affection for him would remain unchanged. In late March, a letter intended for John was received by Deborah. The sender was a former prison inmate, but she couldn't read it, as John quickly grabbed the letter from her. Initially, he accused her of mistrust with a burst of anger, then claimed it was from a pen pal whom he was supporting emotionally. Deborah felt uneasy about this explanation. The following day, with her husband away on work, she decided to sift through his belongings. This search unveiled startling truths about the man she had wed. She discovered that John was an ex-nurse and esthetist, who had succumbed to an addiction to pain medication, leading to his arrest and the collapse of his professional life. Additionally, Deborah uncovered evidence of his history as a swindler. Court records revealed that John had previously cheated and stolen from numerous women. He stumbled upon some court files online. They included a search warrant for his storage unit. Inside the unit, authorities found a .38 caliber handgun, bullets, a GPS tracker, syringes, and other suspicious items. That was the moment Deborah realized John's true identity. He was a dangerous individual and an armed felon. He had several restraining orders against him from different women. Most alarmingly, she discovered he had been released from prison on October 8th and met her just days later. Feeling overwhelmed by these revelations, Deborah examined the documents meticulously. She felt both shocked and scared. She realized the potential danger John posed to her and her children. Choosing to act normal temporarily, Deborah waited for the right moment. When John left for the hospital due to back issues, she seized the opportunity. With her family's help, she moved out during his absence. During the packing process, they found more documents belonging to John. These were prints of online comments from other women warning about him. They described John as persuasive and adept at deception. They cautioned others not to be swayed by his attractiveness and charm. Convinced of his instability, Deborah decided to end their relationship and leave. Despite her decision, John kept messaging her, pleading for her to visit him in the hospital. Overcome with guilt, Deborah relented. By June 2015, John had successfully persuaded Deborah to reconcile with him. He offered many justifications for the oddities found among his possessions. He admitted he had hidden his past because he believed a woman like her wouldn't have noticed him otherwise. For this reason, he pretended to be a doctor to impress her and now implored her help in rehabilitating and salvaging his life. Still enamored with him, Deborah granted him another chance. They relocated together to a new apartment in Irvine. However, this decision deeply troubled her children, leading the couple to maintain some distance from them temporarily. By March 2016, the couple had been married for a year already. For 3 months, Deborah helped John recover from his addiction. However, she was deeply distressed because her entire family disliked him, especially Jason. This animosity was mutual. Matters escalated to the point where her husband forbade Deborah from seeing her daughter. When John discovered that Deborah was paying for Jacqueline's real estate lessons, he reacted spitefully. He called the school to slander Jacqueline in front of her teachers and wrote her threatening and indecent messages, insisting that her mother no longer wanted anything to do with her. He even threatened that one day he would come and harm Jacqueline. It became evident that while John appeared to be recovering, his malevolence and cruelty were intensifying. By April 2016, Deborah's patience had reached its limit, prompting her to file for divorce. She sought a peaceful dissolution of the relationship and began gradually withdrawing money from her bank account for safekeeping. Unfortunately, she kept $30,000 in a hiding place in one of the lower drawers at home. When John discovered this money, he asserted that it belonged to him as well. Realizing that divorce proceedings were imminent, John started showing more aggression. Sensing the danger, Deborah knew it was time to flee. She took some cosmetics and work items and moved to Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine, a location she felt safe due to numerous surveillance cameras around the complex. Deborah attempted to obtain a restraining order. However, the Orange County judge denied her request since there was no immediate threat. John lived in another state and hadn't made any direct recent moves against her. With little recourse, she focused on breaking off the relationship and moving on. After the separation, John relocated to one of Deborah's properties in Nevada. He repeatedly tried contacting her, but she consistently ignored his calls. Then things took a drastic turn on June 11, 2016. That day, as Deborah drove her Jaguar to work, an alarming incident occurred. Her car was stolen from the parking lot while she was at the office. The vehicle was soon found only about a block and a half away, drenched in gasoline, but not set on fire, resulting in only minor damage. Security footage from the area clearly identified John Mahan as responsible for the theft attempt, a stark reminder of his continued threat and volatility despite living in another state. On the evening of August 20th, 2016, Tara came home from work and parked in the lot. As she got out of her car, John suddenly appeared. He attacked her with a knife, trying to drag her back into the vehicle. Screamed for help during the struggle. When John covered her mouth, she bit him hard. A fierce struggle erupted right there in the parking lot. Tara, wearing heavy boots, managed to kick her assailant and knock the knife from his grasp. Seeing a chance, she grabbed the knife and repeatedly stabbed John. She delivered 13 wounds, with the last stab piercing his eye. Trembling with shock, Tara was fortunate that a neighbor saw her and came to help with a towel for her injuries. The neighbor also called the police. John was still alive when paramedics arrived. They found he had a pulse. In John's car, authorities discovered duct tape, cable ties, kitchen knives, and a passport. This indicated he might have planned to abduct Tara and leave the city with her as a hostage. John Mahan was taken to the hospital, but died 4 days later at age 57. His remains were cremated and no memorial service was held, as he was universally disliked by those who knew him. Deborah and her children were deeply traumatized by the entire incident. It took some time for Deborah to return to normal life, but she still struggles with guilt for bringing a criminal into their family. Now Deborah has become very cautious. She carries a stun gun and pepper spray at all times for protection. She has stated that she would never meet someone online again based on this experience. Jamie Hahn was born on October 25, 1983. Growing up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, she lived with her 2 brothers and sister, Brett, Justin, and Ashley. Despite their parents' divorce and remarriage, Jamie remained a cheerful child. She attended a small yet renowned private prep school celebrated for its educational excellence. In junior high, Jamie visited the University of North Carolina with her classmates. She instantly fell in love with the campus and aspired to attend. Even as a student, she aimed to impact others' lives by joining the board of the Center of Hope to support troubled teens. Later on, Jamie engaged in various political campaigns. One notable campaign was Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential run, a competitor to Obama. During this campaign, Jamie emerged as a prominent figure in North Carolina's Democratic Party. During one campaign, she met Nation and formed a deep professional relationship with him that later evolved from platonic to romantic. 4 months after their first romantic moment, they announced their engagement and married on April 18, 2009. Their intense love was anchored in a deep friendship. Jamie and Nation thrived in their respective careers. Jamie ran her own political fundraising consulting firm, while Nation was a well-known online strategist aiding politicians and nonprofits with their campaigns. Described by friends and acquaintances as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous, the couple was well regarded. They took their marriage vows seriously and actively participated in projects like the Coalition to protect young families in North Carolina. Although they were childless at that time, Jamie and Nation planned on starting a family soon. They both enjoyed vibrant social lives. Jamie was known among her friends and family as a compassionate individual who had the ability to spread happiness wherever she went. Her talent and enthusiasm for politics led many to foresee a promising future for her. However, unexpectedly, their seemingly perfect world suddenly fell apart on April 22, 2013. Around 5:20 p.m., Jamie frantically ran from her house and sprinted a few dozen meters before collapsing unconscious in a neighbor's yard. Her body was drenched in blood. Onlookers on the street were shocked by the scene and shouted for someone to call 911. A neighbor, who saw the turmoil unfolding in his yard, immediately phoned emergency services. Through Jamie's disoriented words, he understood that someone named John, who seemed to still be inside her house, had assaulted her with a knife. He quickly applied a towel to the numerous wounds on her abdomen and urgently summoned an ambulance and the police. Arriving patrol officers traced the blood from the neighbor's yard back to the Hahn residence. Encircling the house, they commanded the individual inside to exit with hands raised. Moments later, a disheveled bald man emerged on the porch. The officers noted he bore wrist injuries and a stab wound in his abdomen. Due to his injuries, this unidentified man was transported to the hospital in an ambulance, escorted by a police officer. En route to the hospital, the wounded man grew distressed and tearful, expressing regret that this hadn't occurred sooner, and repeatedly murmuring a desire to die. Following his medical treatment, the police endeavored to ascertain his identity, reasons for being in the Hahn residence, and circumstances leading to this tragic event. They soon discovered he was 31-year-old Jonathan Wayne Brill, a close friend of Nation and a guest in their home. Jamine also knew John well. She had employed him as an accountant in her political consulting firm after he relocated to North Carolina. The couple had generously offered him accommodation in their home until he could find his own place. Nation and John hailed from the same hometown and first crossed paths in 2000 during a church trip. Despite a 4-year age gap, they quickly struck up a friendship. As it often happens with childhood friends, they drifted apart when one went off to college, but rekindled their bond post-graduation. They became virtually inseparable. Jonathan even had the honor of being the best man at Nation and Jamine's wedding. In April 2009, the trio was akin to the Three Musketeers, following the ethos of one for all and all for one. They shared vacations, regular Monday dinners, and celebrated holidays together. To some neighbors, Jonathan seemed almost like an extension of the Hahn family, given how much time he spent at their home. This deep, seemingly unbreakable bond makes the violent incident that left all three with stab wounds in their own home all the more perplexing and tragic. Every Monday, Jamie and Nation would host their mutual friend Jonathan for dinner. On that particular day, Broyhill arrived earlier than usual with the intention of discussing recent campaign details with Jamie. The friends were deeply concerned about John's well-being, as he had confided in them about his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, a notably aggressive and often terminal disease. The Hahns, in their caring nature, accompanied Jonathan to his medical appointments and were consistently present, offering every possible support in his arduous battle for life. There was an instance when Jamie, overwhelmed with emotion, asked Nation if they should consider having a child soon, so that their future offspring might have the chance to know Jonathan. Such was their affection and regard for their friend. They wished even their yet-to-be-born child could have the opportunity to bond with him. The recent diagnosis of cancer was a harsh blow, but it wasn't the first health challenge Broyhill had encountered. Over the years, John had experienced multiple hospitalizations. He had once revealed to Nation that he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Consequently, the Hahns invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily, offering care and support until his health improved. On that fateful Monday, Jamie and Jonathan were already engaged in work-related discussions in the kitchen when Nation arrived home and headed upstairs to change. Nation was startled by Jamie's screams, calling out his and then John's name. Assuming that Brill may have fallen ill given his medical condition, Nation hurried downstairs midway. He was met with Jamie's terror-stricken voice, crying out that someone was trying to stab her. Rushing into the kitchen, Nation was confronted with the horrifying sight of his wife on the floor, bleeding profusely. John stood over her, wielding a large kitchen knife. As Brill started advancing towards Nation, knife raised threateningly. Nation froze in disbelief. How could such a nightmare unfold in mere minutes? In a desperate act of self-defense, Nation grabbed the knife blade with one hand, while striking John in the face with his other hand. Amidst this chaos, he frantically urged Jamie to run for safety, attempting to subdue a man who until moments ago was his closest friend, seemed almost unreal. Despite her grave injuries, Jamie miraculously managed to rise from the floor and flee through the side door of their home. Once she was out, Nation, overcoming shock and tumult, pushed Jonathan aside and hurried after his wife. Outside, Jamie desperately made her way to the nearest neighbor's house for help. Unfortunately, no one responded to her urgent knocking. Summoning her remaining strength, she attempted to reach the next house, but collapsed unconscious in their yard due to her overwhelming injuries. Alerted by the commotion and drawn by the screams, passers-by quickly came to her assistance, while a neighbor called for an ambulance and the police. Meanwhile, Nation, panicked, searched frantically for Jamie. Following the trail of blood led him to discover her in a neighbor's yard. She was conscious, but in agony, clutching her side. Kneeling beside her, he took her hand and tried comforting her with promises of recovery and future anniversaries and vacations by the sea, though tears streamed down his face. As he spoke, clutching Jamie's hand, Nation was overwhelmed by thoughts of a life without her, and unable to fathom how their peaceful life had taken such a sudden turn. As they awaited help, a neighbor swiftly brought a towel to press against Jamie's bleeding abdomen. Unfortunately, the towel was quickly soaked with blood. Another compassionate neighbor elevated Jamie's legs onto a bag of leaves, trying to give some comfort. The ambulance was on its way, but to the onlookers, the wait felt endless, even though it was only a few minutes. Jamie's breathing grew labored, a clear sign of her critical state. When the paramedics arrived, they promptly administered life-saving measures. Nation, having suffered severe cuts to his hand while wrestling with the knife, also desperately needed medical attention. Both he and Jamie were rushed to the hospital. During transport, Jamie lost consciousness and upon arrival was taken immediately for emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Nation, overwhelmed with worry for his wife and oblivious to his own pain, received stitches. He was in such shock that he repeatedly tried to enter the ICU, desperate for any updates about Jamie, but was denied access. Seated anxiously on a hospital bed, Nation was tormented by thoughts of Jamie's condition. Over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery, and severe liver damage, his only solace during those excruciating moments was hoping and praying for her survival. By some miracle, Jamie did survive the surgery initially, but tragically this hope was short-lived. She never regained consciousness. 2 days after this harrowing ordeal, Jamie succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy revealed a grim reality. She had sustained 24 stab wounds across various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. However, the most lethal injuries were inflicted on her abdomen and chest, resulting in catastrophic damage to her lungs and liver. Meanwhile, Jonathan Brill had inflicted wounds upon himself and was hospitalized for 8 days to recover from his self-inflicted injuries. On Tuesday, April 30th, 2013, still needing medical attention with bandages on both wrists, Brill was transported on a stretcher to the magistrate's office in Wake County. The individual was formally charged with first-degree murder in the case Jameen Khan and assault with a deadly weapon on Nation Honorable due to the severity of the charges. He was held without bail and at Central Prison in Raleigh. This facility was specifically chosen because it housed a hospital wing, ensuring that Brill would continue to receive the necessary medical treatment while in custody for his crimes. The tragic and sudden loss of Jameen profoundly impacted many, leaving a lingering question. Why would someone she considered a best friend commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future? In the wake of the tragedy, speculation swirled within the community about a substantial amount of money that had gone missing during the election campaign, managed by Jameen's team. Jonathan Brill, who had served as the accountant, officially ceased working for the company at the end of 2012. Despite this, he remained responsible for providing Jameen with financial details and assisting in the preparation of financial reports. It was suspected that Jameen might have discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this discrepancy. This confrontation could have triggered his violent outburst. On April 22, 2013, Jameen had invited Jonathan over for their regular Monday dinner and intended to discuss the company's financial issues. The exact sequence of events during Nation's brief absence remains unclear. However, it is widely believed that Jameen might have challenged Jonathan regarding the missing funds during this time. As time passed, Nation's physical wounds began to heal, but emotional and psychological scars remained deep and unhealing. 6 months following this devastating event, Jameen's family and Nation, her grieving husband, scattered her ashes near Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church. This place was significant because Jameen had dedicated her time and efforts as a volunteer there. In a poignant twist of fate, just a week before the tragedy, the Hans had requested the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who they believed was battling cancer. Did they know that soon, it would be they who needed the prayers of their community in the wake of such an unimaginable loss? The Nation had to grapple with the truth that an individual he had known from childhood, whom he saw as his dearest friend, had completely shattered his life and, even more heartbreakingly, claimed the life of the woman he adored more than anything in the world. According to Nation, Jameen was his anchor, his backbone, and his soulmate. He couldn't fathom how the sun could continue to glow without her. The trial of Brill commenced on March 4, 2015. The district attorney informed the jury that Jonathan, serving as Jenny's financial manager, had written 39 checks to himself, misappropriating around $50,000, the identical sum missing from the account. To rationalize his deeds, Brill claimed various health issues including brain impairment from multiple sclerosis, memory deficits, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. Compassionate Jamie refrained from confronting John about such a sensitive matter during his challenging times. She tactfully sidestepped the issue, hoping Brill would identify and rectify the mistake. All seemed normal until she got a call from a debt collector. Then the district attorney unveiled a startling truth. The preceding year, the defendant's first hospitalization occurred when he was admitted following an episode at Hans' residence. Prior to that, Jonathan hadn't sought any medical treatment, as his health records confirmed. All along he had deceived Jamie and Nation about his health conditions. No gallbladder operation, no multiple sclerosis, and no cancer, but merely a manifest mental disorder and something dreadful. Within the search history revealed that the man had been seeking information on pancreatic cancer and specialists in this particular field, evidently to lend credibility to his falsehoods. He also looked up cruises that could be taken without a passport. John had arranged a one-way journey to Las Vegas for April 23rd, but canceled it on the 22nd, nearly 2 hours before assaulting Jamie with a knife. Jonathan admitted to the authorities that he had indeed misappropriated the campaign funds and fabricated all his medical conditions. When the Hans escorted him to medical appointments, waiting in the car as devoted, caring friends, he merely roamed the hospital halls. In recent times, Jonathan grappled with depression and suicidal inclinations. He confessed to being tormented by voices urging him to harm others. He purchased the knife for himself, supposedly planning to use it in Vegas to end his life. Yet, he believed Jameen would confront him about the financial irregularities. When she did, he began to inflict wounds on himself. Jameen attempted to intervene, but at that point he was so deranged and furious that he started assaulting his friend impulsively. Jonathan recalled attacking Jamie, yet parts of this episode were wiped from his memory. His lawyer and Jonathan himself realized that fully dismissing the charges was unfeasible due to the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Still, they aimed to argue for temporary insanity to lessen the sentence. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Nationhan was allowed to speak. With a voice filled with sorrow, he expressed, "We lock our doors at night to block out the world's evil, but it's chilling to think what occurs when evil holds the key." He addressed these words to his former best friend. On March 19, 2015, the jury announced their decision. They ruled Jonathan Brill guilty of first-degree murder of Jamie Han and the attempted murder of Nation Han. The judge issued a life sentence without parole. Jameen's intentions were utterly pure, and her death was so senseless that even Jonathan later acknowledged in an interview that if he had been honest with the Hans, she would have forgiven him. Suddenly, their closest friend became their worst fear. This story defies any rational explanation. Max received an urgent call from his close friend, Jonathan Hoffman, on May 18, 2012 at 5 p.m. Both were seniors at Farmington Central High School in the affluent West Bloomfield area near Detroit, Michigan. Their friendship began in ninth grade during an English class and was sparked by a mutual appreciation for Tupac, one of the most influential figures in American hip-hop. Jonathan confided in Max that he had recently failed a court-mandated drug screening. He had been on probation since authorities found a prohibited synthetic substance in his vehicle 2 months earlier. Jonathan expressed concern over his grandmother Sandra's intense anger towards him. At 17 years old, Jonathan had been living in his grandparents' apartment for 9 months following his parents' divorce and their relocation to Arizona. Initially, Jonathan went with his parents to Arizona. However, shortly after their arrival, the family was dealt a severe blow when his younger sister Jessica was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor. This necessitated multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Adapting to a new school while coping with his sister's health issues left Jonathan feeling unhappy and despondent. Jonathan was overjoyed when his grandmother Sandra suggested he return to West Bloomfield and stay with her until he completed high school. The prospect of reuniting with friends and familiar surroundings excited him. Nevertheless, not everyone approved of the arrangement between Jonathan and his grandmother. Jonathan's father Michael, a prominent attorney for many years, had observed some disconcerting traits in Sandra's personality. 74-year-old Sandra Lane, a retired educator and mother of 5, could be exacting and stern. While she cherished her grandson deeply along with her 85-year-old husband Fred, the situation presented its challenges given the teenager's yearning to reconnect with friends during what should have been a stable final year at Farmington Central High School. Jonathan's father eventually conceded, allowing him to thrive once again at Farmington High School. There, he was recognized as the class clown, an exceptionally intelligent student and a tech whiz. He had secured a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. His peers saw him as a spirited, cheerful, and optimistic individual. That's why Jonathan's call to Max caused such alarm. He didn't sound like himself. His voice carried not only concern, but also palpable fear. The friends decided to meet up later that same day, and Jonathan promised he'd text within the next 30 minutes to confirm the time. Max waited for the message, but 40 minutes passed with no word from his friend. Growing impatient, Max decided to call Jonathan directly. The phone rang and rang without any response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Jonathan would never be able to reply again. Just before this incident, around 5:20 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police Department received an emergency call from Sandra Lane's residence, Jonathan's grandmother's home. The young caller informed the dispatcher he had been shot and struggled for breath over those 3 minutes. He begged for help, stating that he was on the brink of death. The assailant had already fled the scene without seeking aid. The subsequent events were even more horrific. The emergency dispatcher listened as Jonathan frantically called out for help before several gunshots rang out again. His screams of pain were followed by faint words that he was dying. Then came a short silence before a woman's scream echoed through the line, leading to an eerie quietude. By about 5:30 p.m., West Bloomfield police arrived at Sandra Lane's condo in the serene Maple Point gated community, a neighborhood known for its low crime rate and predominantly inhabited by retirees. A resident had reported hearing gunshots in this typically peaceful area. As officers disembarked from their vehicle onto the neatly kept lawn, they headed into what would become one of their most chilling calls yet. Another gunshot reverberated from within the residence. Before the officers could make their way inside, a woman appeared at the front door, the officer's instructions to disarm herself. She was a small elderly woman with fading red hair, her clothes spattered with blood. With her hands raised in surrender, she informed the officers that she had just taken her grandson's life. This revelation stunned the officers, yet it paled in comparison to what awaited them inside. As they entered the condo, the officers were confronted with a ghastly scene. Blood and smudges were present in nearly every room. Bullet impacts marred both walls and furnishings, and empty shell casings littered the ground. Near the entryway lay a discarded 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic handgun. Subsequent forensic analysis would uncover additional magazines for the firearm, hidden within the residence. On the upper floor, police found 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman sprawled face down in a pool of blood. He suffered from multiple gunshot wounds across his chest, arms, back, and stomach, indicating that many shots were fired at close quarters. Emergency medical personnel swiftly transported him to Botsford Hospital, clinging to hope they could save him. Sadly, by 6 p.m., Jonathan succumbed to his injuries. Sandra was taken to the closest medical facility as a precautionary measure. Medical professionals conducted various examinations to confirm her well-being. The next day, Sandra Lane faced charges for her grandson's homicide and was detained without bail while awaiting trial for either first or second-degree murder. Her guilt left to be determined by a jury. Throughout this ordeal, she maintained her innocence. News of this incident plunged Jonathan's family, friends and neighbors into deep sorrow and shock. They all pondered what could have driven Sandra to turn a firearm on her dearly loved grandson. The news of this tragic event spread rapidly through the tranquil neighborhood, with media outlets speculating on various theories. Whispers suggested that Jonathan had failed a drug screening test. Journalists highlighted a narrative involving two neglectful parents who left their substance-dependent teenage son in the care of elderly grandparents. Based on the grandmother's testimony, it was revealed that at the time Jonathan's passing, he had an illegal synthetic drug in his system, which had previously caused him complications. His death shortly after another sensational incident involving hallucinogen consumption. Just 2 weeks prior, another youth under the influence of drugs assaulted his family with a baseball bat, resulting in a fatal event. Takia Cipriano and his accomplice consumed a prohibited substance before attacking their parents. Sandra Lane's attorney argued that she had legitimate concerns for her safety due to managing a young man on probation who was difficult to restrain. It was widely reported that this particular drug could induce aggression in users. If an incident similar to Takia's had occurred at Sandra's residence, could her actions against Jonathan be justified as self-defense? This was the reasoning Sandra provided to both the police and jury. She asserted that since Jonathan's return to West Bloomfield, he had become unruly and exhibited aggressive behavior. Sandra claimed that he rarely left the house and mingled with teenagers addicted to dangerous synthetic drugs. Sandra also stated that Jonathan's parents did not inform her about his addiction before his arrival and showed little concern for his activities during his stay. Michael, Jonathan's father, was portrayed as having abandoned him. Jonathan frequently had fits of rage, destroying objects and damaging furniture in his room. When upset or during disputes, he would lash out, even breaking his own possessions like his computer monitor and phone. Authorities confirmed that Jonathan had a history with illegal substances. On March 17, 2011, he was apprehended and penalized for possessing hallucinogenic drugs. Subsequently, in court, he received a 93-day deferred sentence along with a year of probation and the requirement for random drug screenings related to these substances. Jonathan's acquaintances shared with law enforcement their concerns regarding his drug habit and their efforts to redirect him away from it. Sandra exerted considerable effort to assist Jonathan in reforming his ways, focusing on his academic performance and adhering to her guidelines. Nevertheless, he resisted these attempts, displaying defiance, erratic behavior, and occasional aggression. Fred confirmed that from the moment Jonathan arrived, there were continuous and intense disputes between him and Sandra. She even contacted the police multiple times due to Jonathan becoming utterly unmanageable. She sought assistance from the school as well, but all efforts proved futile. Sandra recounted an incident where Jonathan, under the influence of drugs, lost complete control. This situation necessitated hospital staff to restrain him to a gurney. The elderly woman implored his parents for help. However, his father remained indifferent and did not return to Michigan. Gradually, Sandra began fearing for her safety. She confided in her husband about her concerns regarding their grandson and his disreputable associates. In a bid for self-protection and to safeguard her elderly husband, feeling cornered with no other option, Sandra acquired a Glock 17 pistol for defense in case Jonathan or his friends became aggressive. On the critical morning of May 18, 2012, Lane took Jonathan for a drug test that returned positive for illicit substances. Jonathan was instructed to undergo another test later that day. Upon receiving another positive result, he became furious while in his grandmother's vehicle. He resorted to swearing violently, kicking the dashboard, and at one point, seizing the steering wheel, compelling Sandra to halt the car multiple times. Jonathan even attempted to snatch the car keys at one juncture. Upon their return home, the confrontation intensified. Apprehensive that he might be incarcerated, Jonathan decided to flee immediately to Arizona. He demanded $2,000 and the car keys from his grandmother. She complied with neither request. When Grandpa Fred took the dog for a walk, Sandra felt overwhelmingly frightened and attempted to pacify the teenager, to no avail. She retreated to her bedroom and retrieved the loaded pistol, hoping it would compel her grandson to heed her words or at least acknowledge her presence. Upon returning upstairs to Jonathan's bedroom and finding him in the bathroom, instead of heeding her, the boy hurled insults, kicked her in the abdomen, and struck her on the head. A struggle ensued, during which Sandra discharged the firearm. She then fled to the basement in a state of panic, seeking refuge. After a while, she ventured upstairs to check on him, only for her grandson to assault her once more, attempting to wrest the gun away. In the ensuing awe, she shot again in self-defense. This narrative paints a picture of elderly individuals trapped in a dire predicament that tragically culminated in Sandra shooting her beloved grandson out of genuine fear for her own life. However, questions remain as to whether Lane's account is entirely accurate. As the investigation deepened, a contrasting narrative began to surface, one that was still tragic but considerably more concerning. Initial claims by Sandra regarding Jonathan's alleged violent nature didn't align with the experiences of those who knew him personally. Contrary to portraying him as aggressive, interviews revealed that at school, Jonathan was known as humorous and peace-loving. He was always quick to diffuse conflicts with his humor and intelligence. Friends also testified that they hadn't observed any recent changes in his demeanor. Furthermore, Jonathan was described as having a very lean build, standing at just 1.67 meters tall and weighing merely 50 kilograms, hardly fitting the profile of a physically intimidating person. His stature was notably similar to his grandmother's. It appeared that instances of Jonathan's so-called rage were exclusively reported by Sandra, a claim now met with skepticism. Fred, Sandra's husband, acknowledged witnessing heated arguments between his wife and grandson. Despite being present at home almost all the time, there was never any physical violence. Sandra played a key role in overseeing Jonathan's education, establishing strict expectations which the teenager had difficulty meeting. Fred even suggested sending Jonathan back to his parents in Arizona. However, Sandra rejected this proposal, contradicting her claim that the boy was unmanageable under her care. Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, told the police that during the 9 months Jonathan stayed with his grandparents, he maintained daily communication with her and visited them monthly. Throughout this period, Sandra never reported any issues between her and Jonathan, nor did she express feeling overwhelmed by his presence. When Jennifer learned about Jonathan's legal troubles involving illicit substances, she discussed possible solutions with her mother. She considered either rehabilitation or sending him back to Arizona. Sandra convinced her that she could handle the situation independently. Reluctantly, Jennifer agreed to leave her son in her parents' custody, a decision that would later prove tragically significant. Authorities were summoned to the Lane household on 2 occasions. The first call came in March 2012, when Jonathan himself dialed emergency services. He was distressed after consuming magic mushrooms and experiencing severe paranoia, fearing for his life. Upon arrival, police noted that he showed no aggression, but was terrified upon seeing them. He eagerly embraced one officer before being secured to a stretcher for his protection and transported to a medical facility. Just 4 days after this incident with magic mushrooms, Sandra Lane reached out to 911 again. She reported that her grandson was enraged and attempting to flee, while Jonathan informed the dispatcher that his grandmother was forcibly trying to confine him in her vehicle. When officers arrived, they encountered Jonathan vocally berating his grandmother. The law enforcement officials then proposed intervening with the irate youth. Sandra opted to handle the matter herself. This episode was recorded in the police files as a routine verbal dispute between a guardian and a child, which was settled amicably. However, for the detectives leading the investigation, this case increasingly seemed less about a rebellious teenager spiraling out of control and more about a woman enforcing her authority over a defiant child. The hearing on April 12th, regarding the possession of prohibited substances and subsequent probation, had evidently enraged Sandra. She believed she could discipline her grandson effectively. Up until that point, Sandra had been resolute in steering Jonathan onto the correct path. Yet, as graduation neared and her opportunities dwindled, this mission began to look like a failure. In that moment, Sandra faced many choices. She could have contacted her daughter or sent Jonathan for rehabilitation. Instead, she acquired a semi-automatic pistol and took several shooting lessons at a firing range. Determined to prevail in this conflict and assert control over her unruly teenage grandson at any cost. For days after Jonathan was placed on probation, Sandra Lane applied for a license to carry a firearm. On April 18th, she purchased a 9mm Glock, explaining to the store owner that she needed it for home protection. She chose a weapon intended for lethal force, along with ammunition containing expanding bullets designed to inflict maximum damage. After buying the pistol, Sandra trained at the nearest shooting range until she felt proficient in handling it. She kept her newfound expertise hidden from her husband, who remained unaware of the gun's presence in their home. He was quite taken aback when he discovered how much his wife had managed to achieve covertly. On the fateful day of May 18, 2012, Sandra and Jonathan returned home at around 5 p.m. Sandra then requested her husband, Fred, to take their dog for a walk and insisted that he remain outside until she gave him permission to return. Their outdoor time extended for so long that both homeowner and dog grew weary. They ended up sitting together on the grass watching a basketball game. As Fred Wayne, the grandfather of the deceased high schooler, recounted during an interview when they heard police sirens, he failed to grasp the situation. Why did Sandra want Fred to leave them? It seemed less like the action of a woman fearing for her life, and more like someone with a plan, intent on carrying it out without interference or witnesses. If Jonathan was as agitated as described by his grandmother, it's unlikely Fred would have left them alone. However, more compelling evidence against Sandra was yet to come. At that same time, 5 p.m., Jonathan was talking with his friend Max about their evening plans. Max informed the police that Jonathan's tone wasn't angry or excited. Instead, he sounded frightened. He was worried about failing a drug test and anxious about his grandmother's reaction. Jonathan mentioned that Sandra was so furious she threatened to send him back to Arizona. Sandra claimed her grandson violently assaulted her, striking her in the head and abdomen before she discharged the firearm. Medical personnel from the nearest hospital examined her immediately after the incident, but found no injuries or bruises. Ballistic evidence revealed Sandra fired the weapon more than 10 times throughout various locations in the house. 6 bullets struck Jonathan. 2 shots were aimed at his back, indicating he attempted to flee from Sandra. Another shot struck him in the abdomen while he was wounded and conversing with a 911 dispatcher. The police were convinced it was Sandra chasing Jonathan, not the other way around. The grandmother sought to punish her grandson for his perceived wrongdoing while he sought refuge. At some point, she descended to the basement to reload her pistol, likely when Jonathan ascended to his bedroom to call 911, and subsequently returned, shooting him at close range while he lay on the floor bleeding. The final conclusive blow against Sandra's claims of self-defense came from the toxicology report. According to the report, at the time of the shooting, Jonathan's bloodstream didn't contain any prohibited substances. Only a metabolite of a harmful drug was identified in his urine. The forensic examiner clarified that the residual traces discovered in the urine indicated that all substances had left his body and had no impact on Hoffman's behavior. In other words, Jonathan was entirely lucid when Sandra opened fire on him. Consequently, the jury dismissed the defendant's self-defense claim. On March 19, 2013, Sandra Lane was convicted of a serious crime against her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Prior to sentencing, the elderly woman expressed regret for her actions, pleading for understanding. She claimed that her intention had not been to take the teenager's life, but rather to help him resolve his issues together. Meanwhile, her daughter Jennifer urged for the harshest punishment for her mother. She asserted that Sandra Lane was utterly malevolent and would undoubtedly repeat her actions if given the opportunity. Jennifer depicted her mother as a monstrous and obsessed individual fixated on academic achievement. She firmly believed that everything Lane had stated in her statement was falsehoods. She concluded by stating that her son now resided in heaven, a place where Sandra would never have access. Lane received a minimum sentence of 20 years, in addition to a mandatory 2-year term for utilizing a weapon in the commission of manslaughter. Her lawyer had pleaded on her behalf, citing concerns about her potential survival during an extended prison confinement. Jonathan's funeral occurred on May 22, 2012, with approximately 700 people who had known and cherished the young man in attendance. They fondly recalled moments spent with him and cherished him as a cheerful individual who never failed to bring laughter to those around him. As a grandson, Jonathan fell short of his grandmother's expectations, ultimately leading her to conclude that he did not belong in this world. Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, let's listen to the case of Paula Salazar. Paula Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudos Millian, hailed from Maturin, Monegasque. Her father, Leonardo Salazar, came from Tucupita, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. A year after Paula's birth, in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate with their child to Ecuador. They were seeking better opportunities for themselves and their daughter. Shortly after relocating to Quito, the capital of Ecuador, the family dynamic began to deteriorate due to various reasons. Andrina made the decision to separate from Leonardo and moved with Paula to Cuenca, Ecuador's third largest city. In Cuenca lived the mother of Andrina's best friend. She kindly offered them lodging while they sought a new place and means of employment. Meanwhile, given the circumstances and breakup, Leonardo decided to return to Venezuela. He eventually emigrated again, this time to Trinidad and Tobago. Leonardo had long been disabled. An accident during his youth had left his left arm entirely incapacitated. This disability made securing stable employment challenging even in Quito. Following her move to Cuenca, Andrina almost cut off communication with Leonardo completely. She informed him just once that she had secured work on a farm in Tabacundo. A few months after parting ways with Leonardo, Andrina entered into a new relationship with Washington Andreas Imero, a local Ecuadorian and owner of the farm where she worked. Washington came from a wealthy family. When Paula reached about 18 months old, Andrina moved in with Washington, along with Paula. On April 7, 2019, Andrina and Washington welcomed a child together. This marked a period of happiness and unity for the family. However, everything changed dramatically on March 27, 2020. An event occurred that profoundly impacted all involved parties' lives. During that period, the family was living well, enjoying each day on the farm, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. One day Andreas decided to take to the flower plantations by car. However, en route, the girl became very ill. She felt dizzy and began to vomit. Left with no choice, Andreas stopped at a public restroom. As soon as they entered the restroom, Paula vomited again. Andreas decided to leave her alone for a few minutes, while he went back to the car to retrieve a change of clothes, since hers were dirty. Upon his return, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl. He immediately pulled her out and attempted first aid before rushing her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old was handed over to medical professionals, she showed no signs of life. Doctors declared Paula deceased after performing an initial examination. They quickly noticed inconsistencies in Andreas' story. For instance, they observed bruises on her body and face that did not match his account. Medical protocols require doctors to notify police in such situations, which they did right away. Police arrived shortly thereafter and arrested Andreas as a suspect in Paula's death. Although he claimed she had drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy revealed a more troubling reality. Tests showed that Paula had been dead for approximately 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital. This contradicted Andreas' timeline of events. He stated that he had given her first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation just 20 minutes before taking her there. Moreover, the autopsy uncovered severe injuries, several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine and sepsis, all contributing factors to her death. It became clear that Paula's death was not an accident. Her small body bore numerous recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, Paula's father, learned of her death on March 33rd, days after the events transpired. His mother, who remained in Venezuela, informed him via phone. She had learned about it through a friend of Andrina's. After Leonardo left Ecuador, Andrina began a new relationship and ceased all communication with him. Consequently, for 3 days Leonardo was unaware of the tragedy. During that time, he could only see Paula through pictures sent by Andrina and their mutual friends. Additionally, Andrina blocked Leonardo on all social media platforms, preventing any form of communication with Paula. She also cut off contact with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. It is worth noting that she turned most of their mutual friends against Leonardo by portraying him as disinterested in maintaining a relationship with Paula. Despite these challenges, Leonardo was determined to learn about his daughter's death. However, Andrina's family provided an alternative explanation for her passing. At that time, Ecuador, like much of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. Understandably skeptical about this claim, Leonardo began researching virus-related deaths in the country through social media and news sites. He quickly found no children among the few victims. With the assistance of his relatives, Leonardo continued his investigation. One relative sent him a newspaper article reporting the arrest of Andrina on suspicion of killing Paula. Persistently seeking answers, He called Andrina daily until she finally returned his call 10 days later. Because her lawyers had forbidden her to, the next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page with an acquaintance of his. This page was dedicated to Paula. They also set up an Instagram profile called Justice for Paula. The posts they published caused a huge backlash across social media, the main goal to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andrina called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin arranging her daughter's funeral. Even though the prosecutor working on the case asked for more time to investigate the body, Paula's funeral still took place on April 10, 2020. Andrina did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on Paula. Thanks to information posted on social media and shared by Andrina's friends, people in her circle contacted Leonardo and told him about Paula's sad life before her death. They sent Leonardo various pieces of information they had collected, most of which were isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio clips, and similar items. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, Paula had endured abuse from both her stepfather and her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in it. Everyone noted that Paula seemed happy and cheerful only when she was playing alone. In the presence of her stepfather, she appeared depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very fearful. At one point, the little girl told people she trusted that her mother and stepfather would beat her if she misbehaved. One day she even confessed that as punishment, Andreas pushed her into a wall where she hit her head. Paula referred to her stepfather as nothing less than a monster and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. She constantly had nightmares and suffered from insomnia at a young age. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time they moved into the stepfather's home, sleep alone when falling asleep. Paula often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. Additionally, her mother and stepfather forced her to manage on her own without assistance. Moreover, her mother, Andrina, had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old, which seemed unreasonable. Paula was compelled to prepare her own breakfast and dinners, because her mother preferred to sleep in the mornings and take a break from caregiving in the evenings. She simply did not want to care for her daughter. Andrina did not mind that Paula had to handle the oven by herself, despite the inherent dangers. At preschool, where Andrina had enrolled Paula, the girl frequently complained of pain in her legs and back, and often mentioned she could not walk. Her constant complaints, along with the bruises on her body, prompted the teacher to show her to doctors at a health center. After an examination, they concluded that Paula was being mistreated at home. The teachers then called a special police organization to investigate the abuse within Paula's family. Officials took up the case and decided to send Paula somewhere safe while they conducted their investigation. Consequently, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle's care, Andrina's brother. A hearing on the matter was set for December 4, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never appeared for reasons unknown. As a result, they scheduled a retrial for February 27, 2020. However, once again, all the teachers failed to attend. Consequently, the court had no option but to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents and return her to her mother. 1 month later, on March 27, Paula passed away. The exact reasons why the teachers chose not to attend either hearing remain unknown. It is speculated that Andrina might have bribed or persuaded them that although Paula had some issues, it wasn't due to any wrongdoing by her parents. After Paula's tragic death, Andreas was placed in protective custody during the investigation. Soon appealed this decision, resulting in a hearing on June 12, 2020. At the hearing, which was held via video conference, the judge set aiding order and determined Andreas could be released to house arrest. However, during the hearing, Andreas announced that he was withdrawing his appeal. At that time, Leonardo was still conducting a social media campaign and asked his subscribers for financial support to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. His goal was to file a complaint against Andrina, Paula's mother, before it became too late. Andrina had not yet been charged and remained free. Fortunately, Leonardo managed to secure sufficient financial aid, as well as free legal advice from 2 Ecuadorian lawyers, Oswaldo and Alejandro. They generously offered him support and assistance with the lawsuit. Leonardo faced significant challenges to reach Ecuador. He had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela by rafting across dangerous waters and then travel across rugged terrain. Due to the pandemic, all regular maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed. Thus, only a few flights were available to a handful of countries. Once Leonardo arrived into Cairo state, he crossed into Colombia over hazardous terrain. From there, he took a bus to Ipiales and continued onward through hills and plains until reaching Rumichaca Bridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Upon crossing into Ecuador, Leonardo took a cab to Quito. On June 30th, he immediately met with a lawyer upon arrival. The bereaved father filed a complaint against his ex-girlfriend, so she would also be considered a suspect in Paula's murder. By July 6, 2020, an indictment was issued against Andreina. She appeared in court where it was decided that house arrest would suffice instead of full custody. In November 2020, the initial hearing for the case took place. Although a specific trial date had not yet been determined at that time, participation and discussions were intense. Leonardo's attorney voiced concerns about Andreina's potential escape risk, as she had previously attempted suicide using pills. The lawyer requested that Andreina be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge this request, and also reduced her required court appearances to once a week instead of twice. However, shortly after, Andreina requested a reconsideration regarding the necessity of wearing the electronic bracelet. Consequently, another hearing was held on November 16th to review this decision. These developments inevitably caused delays in the trial proceedings, but eventually the judge set a new date for December. Despite limited media coverage of Andreas and Andreina's trial, much information found its way onto social media platforms. However, due to the pandemic dominating news coverage at the time, some details remained unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At that point, no final decision had been made regarding Andreina's alternative imprisonment options, while Andreas remained detained at the Regional Detention Center. The trial was conducted behind closed doors, with no media representatives present. Some participants attended via video link to ensure proceedings continued smoothly despite restrictions. According to testimony from the doctor who performed Paula's autopsy, several disturbing findings were made. Nearly all of her spinal discs had been rebuilt. She suffered broken ribs, some of which had fused naturally over time, and she displayed symptoms like nail stigmata, where nails grow into the skin, as well as bruises and scratches on her face and body. Furthermore, there was fluid accumulation in her lungs and serious injuries, such as scars on her head and lacerations on her colon. These medical findings suggested prolonged physical trauma before Paula's death, and became critical evidence in understanding what transpired during her final days. The later injuries were what caused the infection to develop into sepsis, ultimately leading to death. The autopsy report confirmed that by the time took Paula to the hospital, she had been deceased for approximately 24 hours. The extent of her internal and external injuries revealed the severity of cruelty she had endured, as well as the negligence of her guardians, who never once sought medical attention for her. Additionally, Paula was malnourished, underweight, and too small for her age, with clear mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, her mother, Andreina, tried to persuade family and friends that Paula had numerous psychological problems. She asserted that these issues led to self-harm behaviors, which were attempts by Paula to attract attention. According to Andreina, when Paula's younger brother was born, Paula began lacking parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and attempted to manipulate everyone through crying. In October 2019, even though Paula was supposed to stay with her uncle per a board's decision, she actually continued staying at her parents' house most of the time, and only slept at her uncle's house occasionally. This indicates that measures taken by authorities did not achieve their intended outcomes. Furthermore, it was established that in 2017, shortly after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, Paula began experiencing abuse, likely starting right after Andreina entered into a relationship with Andreas. At the trial attended by over 40 witnesses from the accusing party, it was confirmed that Paula endured abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the final hearing before the judge delivered the verdict, Andreina claimed full responsibility for the child's abuse. She admitted to beating Paula with a belt, and sometimes using her fists. Through this statement, Andreina attempted to deflect blame away from her partner Andreas. She stated emphatically that he was innocent, that he had no involvement in the matter, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andreina also mentioned that she had reprimanded her daughter for causing issues with her new husband. Breaking up with him meant returning to the streets, and losing the financial stability she could only gain through his support. Taking care of her daughter was not her main concern. Upon reviewing Paula's circumstances, the judges expressed concern for the couple's newborn son. However, they noted that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It is worth mentioning that Andreas opted to exercise his right to remain silent and has not commented on the incident since his arrest on February 3, 2021. Paula's trial concluded with both defendants being found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum penalty for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the prosecution sought the maximum punishment for the perpetrators. However, considering an aggravating factor that Paula was just 4 years old and unable to defend herself, the chief judge sentenced Andreina and Andreas to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, convicted individuals have 3 days to appeal a verdict. The couple, as anticipated, indicated their intention to do so immediately. Despite being sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison, Andre remained under house arrest instead of being jailed directly. She utilized her opportunity to appeal, necessitating higher court confirmation of her incarceration sentence. Meanwhile, she continues to follow the previously imposed measures. This situation is markedly different from Andreas' case. He was detained upon his appearance at the hospital with a deceased girl. Public outrage has been palpable over Andreina remaining at large. Of particular note is Leonardo's anger and concern over her potentially evading justice.